Ravenshaw College, Cuttack, Nisakanta Sanyal, November 15, 1932. Contents: Auspicatory observance obeisance to Sri Guru, the devotees and the Supreme Lord. Sri Krishna, Chaitanya did not appear primarily for delivering conditioned souls. The real purpose of his appearance concerns himself as he is. Godhead is willing and able to disclose his own specific self. Introductory Vol. Chapter I. Object and Method. The object is to write the theistic account of Sri Krishna Chaitanya identical with the absolute truth fully revealed by himself. The narrative has been received from preceptors whose vision is undisturbed by physical or mental obstruction. But they did not tell this thing in the present form and language. Sources of the present work. Thakur Bhaktivinoda is the pioneer of the spiritual exposition of the career of Sri Krishna Chaitanya in the present age. Chapter E. The real nature of Sri Krishna. Empiric misinterpretation of the transcendental history of Krishna due to sectarian rancor. Outline of the career of Krishna. Chapter I. The highest worship of Sri Krishna. The transcendental nature of the amorous service of Krishna by the spiritual milkmaids of Brahma is realizable by conditioned souls by gradual stages as the result of their progressive endeavors on the path of spiritual living. Chapter IV. Comparative study of religion. The comparative study of religion is the study of the distinctive divine personalities revealed by the Vedic and Puranic records. Chapter V. History of atheism. The genesis and great variety of the atheistical schools directly and indirectly dominate religious opinion of the world. Chapter V. History of theism. Progressive revelation of the highest divine service has been the correlative of the growing volume and nature of atheistical opposition. Chapter V. The founder agrees. The systems of Sri Vishnuswami, Sri Nimbaditya, Sri Ramanuja and Sri Madhva mark the revival of Vaishnavism traceable to the prehistoric records. They embody the reverential worship of Vishnu. Their secondary value consists in being an uncompromising protest against the opinions of the speculative creeds. Their spiritual synthesis, although sound, is incomplete. Chapter V. Historical Vaishnavism. Historical evidence of the prevalence of the worship of Vishnu as transcendental Godhead is available from time immemorial. Revelation is an eternal spiritual process and not a mundane phenomenon occurring within the span of measurable time. The nature of the historical position of Srimad Bhagavatam. Chapter X. History of Divine Descendants. Avatars. The history of theism is the history of the descents of the divinity and his paraphernalia to the mundane plane. Sri Krishna Chaitanya Vol. A. Chapter I. Country and society. Spiritual Gauda and Nabadwap are different from the mundane country and town bearing those names. Identification of the site of Old Nabadwap, the city of the 9 islands, and the places that are the scenes of the activities of the Lord. Sri Mupur. Old Nabadwap was a famous university town. Current religious practices of the period. Nature and cause of the unpopularity of the Vaishnavas. Chapter E. Family and elders. Correspondence between the Leelas of Sri Krishna and Sri Krishna Chaitanya. The kindreds, associates and servitors of the Lord form the eternal divine paraphernalia. Sri Jagannath Misra, Sri Nityananda, Sri Thakur Haridas, Sri Advaitacharya, Sri Madhabendra Puri, Sri Aswarapuri. Implications of the name Sri Krishna Chaitanya. Chapter I. Birth and infancy. Advaita invokes the birth of Sri Krishna. The appearance of the Lord hinted in the scriptures. Divine birth described. The birth of the Lord hailed by his elders. Spiritual nature of the event. Advent of the Lord was greeted by the chant of Hari, casting the horoscope of the divine infancy. Sachi Devi worships the Ganges and the goddess Sasti. The nature of the parental affection of Jagannath Misra and Sachi Devi. Avatara, descent, does not mean incarnation. Chapter IV. Infancy and boyhood. The baby was attended by all the ladies of the neighborhood who constantly sang the name of Hari to stop his cries. Extraordinary and funny incidents happened daily. Naming of the baby. Significance of the name Viswamdhara. The custom of testing the disposition of a newborn baby embodies the underlying principle of the Varnashrama institution. The activities of infant Nimai are very much appreciated by devotees. The baby catches hold of a venomous serpent and is couched on its coils. The deeds of Sri Chaitanya are not manifestations of yogic powers. Chapter V. Boyhood. Child Nimai dances to the ladies' chant of Hari. He begs from passers-by fruits and sweetmeats and gives them as reward to those ladies. His reckless depredations in the neighbors' houses. An extremely naughty child. The boy is detected in the act of eating raw earth in preference to fried rice and sweetmeats. The child is stolen by 2 thieves. The parents see the footprints of Vishnu in the room of the child. Nimai eats the food cooked by a pilgrim Brahmana for being offered to divine cowboy and manifests to him his own divine form of Gopala. Chapter V. Growing boy, beginning of study. Perforation of the ear. Tonsure. Learning the alphabet. Strange boyish demands. Nimai ate the offerings prepared for Vishnu on Ekadashi day by Jagaddis and Hiranya Pandits. The Lord is recognizable only by his servants. Nimai was leader of all the turbulent Brahmana urchins. His mischievous pranks at the bathing ghats of the Ganges. Imitations of these activities by modern pseudo-incarnations. Supernatural experiences of Sachi and Misra. Chapter V. Growing boy, continued. Nimai makes his mother promise to observe the Ekadashi fast. His turbulence continues to increase. He is afraid only of Viswarup, his elder brother. Account of Viswarup. Attractiveness of Nimai. Viswarup renounces the world. Advaita declares to the devotees the certainty of the coming of Krishna within a short time. Child Nimai shows himself to the devotees in response to the assurance of Advaita. Nimai becomes more attentive to his studies. The ban on his studies is removed. The underlying principle of ceremonial purity and impurity. His investiture with the sacrificial thread. Sri Vamana and King Bali. Nimai is admitted to the Chatuspathi of Sri Gangadas Pandit. His relations with his fellow students. Nimai's timpani of the sutras of Kalapa La Vyakarna. Misra beholds in a dream the sannyas of Nimai. Misra's disappearance. Chapter V. Early youth and student life, love of Sachi Devi for Nimai. Wayward conduct of Nimai towards Sachi Devi. Nimai procures gold for the family in an unaccountable manner. Vaishnavism is not sentimentalism. The career of Sri Caitanya is to be followed, not imitated. The beautiful appearance of Nimai as a student, looked up to by the pupils of Gangadas Pandit. Routine work at the Academy of Gangadas Pandit. Murari Gupta. Nimai's opposition to the mode of instruction current in the academies of Nabadwap. Chapter X. Professor Life and Marriage. Nimai Pandit sets up his own academy in the Chandi Mandap of Mukunda, Sanya. He regrets malinterpretation of the Shastras by the empiric teachers of Nabadwap. Meeting with Sri Lakshmi Devi. Nature of the marriage of Godhead. Banamali Acharya is matchmaker. Marriage ceremonies. Sachi Devi realizes the divine nature of the bride. Misunderstandings regarding marriage of Nimai Pandit. Chapter X. Professor Life, continued. Professor Nimai was admired by all except the Vaishnavas. Mukunda Datta. Popular estimate of Kirtana as mode of worship. Nimai Pandit makes the acquaintance of Sri Isvarapuri. Sri Krishna Leelamrita. Sri Isvarapuri's loving devotion to Krishna. Nimai Pandit's disputations with Mukunda Datta and Gadadhar. Nimai Pandit's logical riddles. Strolls the streets of Nabadwap in the company of his pupils, inviting public disputation on any subject. Discourses to pupils on the bank of the Ganges. Chapter Z. Unrecognized direct manifestation. Manifestation of himself as the divinity under the guise of nervous malady. Rationale of misunderstandings regarding spiritual manifestation. Is such manifestation inconsistent with his role of devotee? Complete understanding of the subject not possible except by the mercy of the spiritual preceptor. Specific difficulty in the way of physicians who put their faith in medical science. Departmental view of religion. Real nature of spiritual activity. Chapter Z. In the streets of Nabadwap. Afternoon visits to citizens. In a weaver's home. In the milkman's quarter. In the homes of a dealer of perfumes, a garland maker, a betel seller, a dealer in conches. In the home of a diviner who calculates his former births. The diviner's realization. The Lord's conversation with Sridhar. Object of these visits. Sridhar's philosophy. Is begging the legitimate occupation of Brahmanas. Did Sri Gaur Sundar approve the trade of the betel seller? The eternally free state of the soul. Sachi hears the strains of the divine flute and has the vision of the never-ending divine manifestations. Nature of the service of Sri Sachi Devi. Arrogance of Sri Gaur Sundar. Sri Gaur Sundar did not engage in amorous pastimes with hypothetical mistresses. Krishna's conduct not to be imitated by Jivas. Mercy of Sri Gaur Sundar. Sribas Pandit discourages arrogance of Sri Gaur Sundar. Reverential versus confidential service. Chapter Z. The ideal householder. Hospitality to chance guests. Charity and open-handed hospitality to chance guests. The principal duties of every householder. The underlying principle of such injunction. Provision for the poor. Relation of householder to sannyasin. The specific nature of the charity of Sri Gaur Sundar. Duties of Vaishnava householder. Lakshmi Devi cooks the family meals. Her household duties described. Position of wife in the household of her husband. Personal service of Godhead. Performance of domestic duties to please the Supreme Lord. Menial work and personal subordination. Desire for sensuous enjoyment, root cause of all mundane trouble. Relationship of Sri Lakshmi Devi to Sri Gaurasundar grossly misunderstood by philanthropists. Sojourn of the Lord to East Bengal. Sri Gaurasundar teaches the Brahmanas of East Bengal. Effect of his visit. Pretenders to saviorship condemned by Thakur Vrindavandas. Ethical conduct obligatory on all. Moral life not the goal of human activities. Disappearance of Sri Lakshmi Devi. Personality of Sri Lakshmi Devi. Chapters of Tapan Misra. Return from East Bengal. Nimai Pandit accepts presents from his pupils. Trade in religious teaching forbidden. Tapan Misra inquires about the real nature of the object and method of spiritual practices. Tapan Misra's dream. The Lord divulges to Tapan Misra the divine dispensation of the Kali age. The Mahamantra. Observations on the creed. Misunderstandings. The simplest possible creed. Is faith in creed rational? Mahamantra not a magical formula. Nature of spiritual enlightenment. Return of Nimai Pandit from East Bengal. He learns about the disappearance of Sri Lakshmi Devi. Nimai Pandit consoles his mother. Spiritual conduct and worldly needs. Grief of Sri Gaurasundar. Chapter XV. Marriage with Sri Vishnupriya Devi. The making of Tilaka mark on the forehead compulsory for his students. Distinction between Tripundra and Urdhapundra. Is Tilaka mark a symbol? Nimai Pandit shuns the society of woman. This is ignored by the pseudo-sect of Gaurnagaris. Condemnation of sexuality by the scriptures. Spiritual carnality. The charge that Sri Chaitanya was of unsound mind. Marriage of the Lord for a second time. The sacrament of marriage. The conduct of Sri Chaitanya identical with, yet distinct from, the Leela of Sri Krishna. Sri Chaitanya personates the function of Sri Radhika Kasanath Pandit as matchmaker. The Adhiba ceremony. Chapters v. Marriage with Sri Vishnupriya Devi. Continued. The marriage ceremonies. Udimanta Khn. Significance of the Lord's marriage. The personality of Sri Vishnupriya Devi. Sri, U, and Neela. The interdependent nature of the functions of the distinctive powers of the Lord. Significance of the subsequent renunciation of the world by the Lord. Chapters v. Triumphs of learning. New method of teaching. Nature of his erudition distinct from defective intellectualism. Pandits of Nabadwip failed to learn the truth. Personal meditation of the teacher. Nimai Pandit exposes the sophistries of the Pandits of Nabadwip. Controversy with Keshab Bhatta, conqueror of all quarters. Digvijay. Deliverance of Keshab Bhatta. Popular appreciation of the scholarship of the Lord. Chapters v. Significance of scholastic triumphs. The text of the shloka of Keshab Bhatta impeached by Sri Chaitanya. The goddess of worldly learning always misleads her votaries. Sri Jiva Goswami not an empiric controversialist. Plight of Keshab Bhatta. Real remedy of real miseries. Cause and nature of the deliverance of Keshab Bhatta. Empiric knowledge does not give possession of power. Empiric knowledge superfluous on attainment of spiritual enlightenment. It is possible to know the truth. Non-transcendental knowledge subordinate to transcendental. The want to know identical with the want to serve the absolute. How inclination to serve the truth is produced. The shock of spiritual awakening. Sight of the Lord. Function of empiric learning. Submission to the divine person. Personality and truth. Transcendental personality of the devotee. Keshab Bhatta not to be confounded with Keshab Kashmiri. Kramadipika. The distinctive characteristic of the servants of Sri Gaurasundar. Why the achievements of this world pass away. Abuse of empiric knowledge aggravates aversion to truth. Arrogance of the devotee of the Lord. The perfection of humility. Chapter 6. Thakur Haridas. Before his meeting with Sri Gaurasundar, Thakur Haridas is the authorized divine agent for the promulgation of the chant of the holy name, the new dispensation of the age. Born in a Mohammedan family. Conversion of the harlot. Process of reclamation of sinners by the chant of the name explained. It is not blind faith. Sensuousness obstructs faith. Conventional and real morality. Reformers often misunderstand the scriptures. The teaching of the Shastras is the function of Brahmanas. Novelty of the new worship resented by Hindus. Empiricism cannot consistently object to the chant of the name. The only function of the soul. Thakur Haridas is real Brahman. Raghunatha Das Goswami, then a boy, meets Thakur Haridas and receives his mercy. Thakur Haridas' exposition of the chant of the name opposed by Gopal Chakravarti as contravening the principles of monistic interpretation of the Vedanta. Devotion, work and knowledge. Pessimism and optimism versus absolutism. Truth is not impersonal, which is the limiting point of all rational discussion. Submission to non-God. The transcendental sound. Grossness of the ideal of liberationism. Enjoyment versus love. Children benefit by association with Asadhas. Chapter XX. Thakur Haridas before his meeting with Sri Gaur Sundar continued. Thakur Haridas shifts to Fuli and meets Advtakriya. Chanting of the name identical with the amorous loving devotion of Braha. The 10 offenses against the name. Thakur Haridas' life at Fulia is altogether different from the practices of Prakrita Sahajiyas, philanthropists. Does Thakur Haridas' creed provide for the needs of our worldly life, or should it be admired from a distance like monism? The real meaning of the life of Sri Chaitanya can be realized by following the teaching of Thakur Haridas. Thakur Haridas same as Brahma. Chanting of the name suits modern conditions. Realization is progressive. How to avoid the clutches of the pseudo-sadhu. The Qazi sets the Muslim governor against Thakur Haridas. Thakur Haridas advice to the prisoners. Does the chanter of the name require the so-called necessaries of life? Thakur Haridas ordered by the governor to be beaten to death. The form of the dialogue, used in transcendental narratives, should not be misunderstood. Principle of religious toleration liable to be misunderstood. Why the persecution of Thakur Haridas cannot be defended. Immunity of Thakur Haridas from bodily pain and injury. Chapters Xi. Thakur Haridas, continued. Exhibition of power by Thakur Haridas impresses his persecutors and secures him against further molestation. Thakur Haridas dances at the show of the snake charmer. The cudgeling of the hypocrite Brahmana by the snake charmer. Spiritual perturbation. The standing grievance of atheists. A Brahmana of Harinadi opposes the chanting of the name with a loud voice. Name and mantra. Chapters Xi. Pilgrimage to Gaya and initiation. Brahmana as sole custodian of the education of the people. The life enjoined by the scriptures on a Brahmana is the probationary stage of spiritual enlightenment. The Lord sets out on pilgrimage to Gaya ostensibly for the purpose of performing the funeral rites of his departed father. The Lord visits Sri Madhusudana at Mandara. He drinks the feet wash of Brahmana. The Lord is the servant of his servant. At Punapna, the sight of the footprints of Sri Gadadhara produces in the Lord all the perturbations of loving devotion and is the turning point of his career. The sight of Hari's feet produces the serving disposition irrespective of fitness. The ethical problem. Ethical necessity of divine grace. The real presence of the feet of Sri Gadadhara at Gaya is Archa. The Lord meets Sri Isvarapuri in the temple of the holy feet of Gadadhara. Meeting with Sri Guru. The Lord obtains the favor of initiation, Diksha, from Sri Isvarapuri. The nature of unconditional surrender to the Guru. Chapters Xi. His initiation, continued. The spiritual principle underlying ritualistic worship. Mentalist objections to ritual. Quest for the substantive spiritual function rendered possible by the grace of the bona fide teacher of the truth. Objectionable form of association with evil. Funeral rituals. Misunderstandings regarding the ritual of Diksha. Readiness to appreciate the transcendental point of view in India. A valuable asset for humanity. The relation of the Guru to his disciple. Mantra admits to the spiritual communion which is necessary for its fruition. Connection of the new dispensation with the older communions. Speedy effects of the mantra on Nimai Pundit. Nimai Pundit's changed conduct. Miracles and transcendental events. Human form of the divinity. Chapters Ksiv. His initiation and after method of service analogous to that of the mood of separation, alone available on the material plane. Mood of separation different from asceticism. Infinity of functions towards the absolute. Cause of the sorrowful mood of Nimai Pundit. His search for Krishna as Sannyasin, not to be mistaken for salvationism. Sight of Krishna, the fulfillment of the probationary stage and beginning of the real search. Arcana and symbolical worship. Place of mantra in Arcana. Arcana sanctioned by Godhead is fulfilled by the vision of the divinity as he is. Quasi-spiritual activities involve neither attachment nor aversion to mundane entities but are full of spiritual interest. Arcana and Bhajana. Conduct prompted by the higher form of worship cannot be understood by those who are not spiritually advanced. The religion of the chant of the name is supremely simple and profound. The personality of a sadhu. Everyone is naturally sincere. Insincerity a suicidal folly. The absolute does not deceive anybody. Physical cases obstruct spiritual living. Persistence of spiritual memory possible by the grace of the sadhu. Service of the sadhu possible only on the transcendental plane. Perfect openness of mind is necessary for not grossly misunderstanding the activity of Sri Caitanya after his initiation, which is the subject of the next volume. Forward men of culture are often found to devote themselves in acquiring knowledge of various subjects which could prove efficacious to them in their needs. So we may not confuse to accept all readers in the same line of thought. The best scrutinizers of knowledge in their cultural extension should possess all skill and dexterity to get there most comfortable and having had a care for eternity and uninterrupted blissful unalloyed knowledge. This incarnate of the acme of knowledge seekers will be the best reader of this book when they can have the privilege of comparing the merits of different views of pure theists. Mental speculationists have diverse objects of investigation, and their diversity of seeking knowledge would simply disturb the peaceful mentality, having been tempted by the duping features of external manifestations, quite suitable and dovetailing the present purposes of enjoyment by their imperfect senses. The writer has got the prime object of furnishing a comparative study in which the position of a reader has the highest place. This is his only ambition, of healing the depraved mentality of the so-called culturists of true knowledge. But the readers have different motives of utilizing the product of their enterprise of perusing the book. One class of readers are found to criticize the merits and demerits of the writer in order to establish their superiority, with a view to puff up their vanity. Another class is observed to muse over the subject by spending their time for the gratification of their senses. The third section of readers mean to profit by reading the book in order to regulate their life for a better purpose. The underestimation of a desirable element for some utilization through temporal gratification of senses would not equals the third position of the reader, who will surely mark the distinctive situation by comparing other things and agree with the author in spending his valuable time for true amelioration. The body of the book will appear before readers as a historical account of the journey of life of a hero. But the hero is not an ordinary mundane hero for a hallucinative ambition with a spiritual tinge. The account will no doubt show that the targeted object of the manifestive spiritual world is eternal and identical with the hero of the speaker. Hasty conclusions will be pouring forth to oppose this by welcoming anthropomorphic and apotheotic thoughts. The delineations will prove that the object pointed to is beyond the comprehension of crippled senses, and the absolute eternity made up of pure knowledge and incessant bliss is never to be had within the compass of our senses. All objects of the phenomena which are comprehended by senses have temporal situation and deformed entity void of different qualities that are always submissive to senses. Sri Krishna Chaitanya's inculcations of the personality of Godhead cannot be restricted to or accused as idolatry. Idols are constructed of mundane materials and are subject to the inspection of senses. The eternal absolute does not exactly submit to these senses, as he does not put himself as a shareholder of phenomenal things. Whichever comes under senses has equal value with one of nature's products and forms to be a subject of the jurisdiction of senses. The eternal absolute is inconceivable by limited senses. The partially eclipsed views of the absolute are shaky, non-absolute, liable to transformation and under the clutch of the span of time. The physical limitations are all accommodated in space, time and particular entities. The naming of the transcendental absolute through the lips of a mundane agent will surely seek after a size, a color, etc., and must undergo the ocular examination. The transcendental absolute should in no case submit to our dermal perceptions, neither to our nasal or lingual activities as well. The transcendental sound has got a distinctive denomination from mundane sounds, which often tend to submit to the test of other senses. As the transcendental sound has not been originated in mundane phenomena, he will not be diffident in showing his true face, whose manifestive realizations are identical with the name himself. In that case, the essence of such sound would not permit the different entities of the same object. As we find in phenomenal objects tracings of numerical base instead of the integral unit, the differential values are integrated in the transcendence. So there is indication of one object by the dinning of the ethereal vibrations in different positions. These sounds converge in one point, who is known as the Absolute. This Absolute is on the eternal plane of all knowledge and incessant bliss and can have manifestive absolute phases with him. If the various sounds are put into this chaotic plane, there is no reconciliation of a synthetic method. This unharmonizing tendency will surely bring a contending and unpleasant atmosphere which we experience every day. The uneclipsed phase of the integral sound will not in any case bring rupture, but harmonize the contending phase due to the intervention of foreign intrusion. The demarcating lines of comprehending the same thing through the chambers of senses would lead to mundane enjoyment, whereas the ignorance of enjoying things through limited scope would put the enjoyer within the barriers. When the observer is one, he sees everything and exercises all his senses for his own gratification. But the servitors who are fractional entities cannot have any harmonious situation unless all of them have got one aim of being predominated over by the absolute. The question of relativity does not become a barrier, as we notice such deformities in these phenomena which are subject to individuality, space and time. This situation, solving the difficulties of mundane relativity and absolute, has been finally settled by the transcendental unspotted manifestive phase, instead of wrongly inculcating a hallucinative theory of absolute by negativing the conception of diversities. The numerical situations of the different entities here have got a relative representation which is certainly condemnable for its undesirability. The glaring desirable features of relativity as delineated in the transcendence should not be anthropomorphized by our poverty-stricken knowledge and narrow views of phenomenal disorders. In the absolute region we find descriptions of mutual manifestive phases, the master there being one with millions of servitors of 4 different classes. We further notice the absolute as the eternally blissful son of the entity of unalloyed knowledge. The absolute friend is the cynosure of all friendly eyes, as the single object of friendship. He is the consort of depending consorts and is the predominating singular object of unalloyed love of predominated objects. Whereas in the mundane plane we find many predominating agents together with predominated sentience. People need not puzzle themselves with the ascription of a motherly idea in the supreme absolute, as the seeming features of parents here have got a dignified position which is nothing but a perverted conception of the real manifestive absolute. Moreover, we find that the parents get the opportunity of serving their only coveted child from his very birth in different capacities. So the eternal position of the master is retained intact from the very advent of the child. If we are to accept services from the Lord, whom we have to render our service, we are simply misled. The divine absolute should not be classed as our servitor, as our eternal position is to render our all-time and wholehearted services to him alone. A deviation from this will be tampering the very principle of transcendental devotion. The author has wisely delineated these crucial points in the instructive life of the Supreme Lord. The enjoying temperament of this temporal world will find a good jerk in the line of thought of approaching the transcendence. Sri Krishna Chaitanya, the greatest world teacher, has exhibited to his taught the transcendental loving principle of unalloyed souls towards the absolute all love where phenomenal dirts could not possibly contaminate the pleasant situation of manifestive relativity. The unalloyed devotional exhibition in the pastimes of Sri Krishna Chaitanya and his followings are the best and greatest boon that could be had in the quest of the absolute. Readers might have noticed one thing in the vital principle of transcendence of the desertion of the enjoying mood and the affinity for temporal deformed objects. This abnegation at the very outset will create a puzzling sensation among the youngsters who have embarked on the journey of life to aim after sensuous enjoyment in temporal phenomena. So they may hastily discard the principle of showing diffidence for their much coveted dream of enjoyment in this world. Sri Krishna Chaitanya has defined the proper use of the relief that is offered by the non-meddling with mundane affairs in an enjoying mood. He has not asked anybody to adopt the indolent processes of non-cooperating with the phenomenal objects. He has rather instructed to practice accepting mundane things when we can trace the connections of the essence of such things with Sri Krishna, the manifested fountainhead of the Absolute. His disclosure has set right the topsy-turvy, hodgepodge situation of this apparently chaotic world. He has further cautioned the renouncers not to summarily reject the association of relative things for fear of their proving to be detrimental to alienating the peaceful soul from the mundane troubles by associating themselves with the purposes of the manifested absolute. The busy people of this world have decided that the gratification of senses should be the essential aim of all our enterprises here as well as in the next world. So they have deemed it fit to adopt the principle of an ethical religion supplying their wants and to fulfill whatever we are in need of. These triple results are the comfortable solutions of the enjoying caliber of sentient entities. This sort of mentality is found in the enjoyers. But there is an opposite section who believes that unless such desiring agencies are stopped, no eternal good can be expected. So they have formulated a different goal for their purpose. These men consider that salvation is required from phenomena by practicing a non-cooperative mood from all and even the necessaries of life, which tantamount to suicidal commission. by following the high-sounding words of annihilation in the absolute, by dismissing the three respective positions of observer, observation and observed, they covet to be finally rescued from phenomenal troubles. The Supreme Lord Sri Krishna Chaitanya has neither encouraged the enjoying elevationists nor the renouncing salvationists. He has prescribed the pure theistic thought of spiritual devotion to the personality of all love by the loving function of the unalloyed souls, instead of plunging into the ocean of miseries which offer extreme troubles to elevationists and to persons who, having bitter worldly experience, desire to terminate their animation by the process of annihilation. The Supreme Lord has thereby settled the question of transmigration. The Semites have, however, adopted a principle, by rejecting the theory of metempsychosis, to dispense with the long-extending life of a migratory element. The love of the Absolute can never be attained by men who seek after their aggrandizement or after their liberation. Persons who entertain the view of their actual freedom from such selfish propensities can have the privilege of knowing what prema is, which has no bartering system of give-and-take policy. The unalloyed souls are meant to love the 11 love with the identification of their eternal loving element. The loving souls are not at all dissatisfied whether the Supreme Lover is inclined to grant their prayer, on the very understanding that their loving connection is inseparable. They at the same time prove themselves to be quite content, as their only lover has deemed it fit to discard them and thereby enjoy by the services offered by them. The consideration of exchange has confined the elevationists and salvationists to their respective gains, whereas no such gain is aimed at by devotees who have thoroughly comprehended their positions of non-traders. This unalloyed love can never be expected in any agents who have got ulterior motives of satisfying their pleasing and enjoying demeanor. Unalloyed service can only be found in prema, which has a special characteristic of pure sacrifice without any remuneration in return. No enjoying mood can have any place in that unalloyed function. The transcendental love should never be compared with the lustful mundane position of an enjoyer. Prema reaches its acme in consorthood and the lower stages in filial love, friendship, services and in neutrality. So this amorous transcendental love has no comparison with other loving affinities. The cardinal point of this unique progression of love has got a steady infinite dimension of activity which can have no equal in our experience. The absolute prema is never to be confused with the shaky position of nuptial love of mundane mortal people, which tends to have reciprocal interest. But as it has no bearing with deformed relativities, no claim can be asserted to combat with the challengers through arguments. The historical account connected with the pastimes of the Absolute need not be mixed with the mundane activities of transformable entities. But the elaboration of transcendental accounts must not be discouraged owing to the bitter experiences we have of our temporal life here. The incidental mentions of history bear a reference of earthly things liable to be perished in time. The essence of history need not be kept at arm's length in consideration of worldly associations which necessitate the existence of components of matter or motion. Descriptive accounts of history help us in considering the relation between the already acquired knowledge and the welcoming of new thoughts. But in the present case, where we are to deal with a case beyond nature's phenomena, we should be cautious not to confuse with human frailties and mixing up with temporal defective impressions of mundane relatives. Historicity of things need not be summarily rejected if it renders help to comprehend the direction and nature of the transcendental views. So every branch of knowledge has efficacy to offer us first aid towards our advancement in the region beyond nature. The transcendental sensuous activities of the Absolute have got transcendental reference and avoid submitting to human senses which are but frail and inadequate. The descriptions of the transcendental pastimes of the Absolute need not be confused with metaphorical analogy, strictly confined to our present situation of acquiring knowledge. Allegories are figments and are treated as innovations of older thoughts in a systematic way in order to place a certain view of things. If they are meant for the purpose of the transcendent and not for our sensuous gratification, we can accept them for the safety of our transcendental health instead of eliminating even the purpose. Mental speculations may drag us to some secular purpose which we should avoid for the sake of studying the Absolute Transcendent, who has no contending character to expel the variegated similar manifestations as we often perceive through our senses. So the author has described the deeds which bear a resemblance to that of history and allegory, provided they are not improperly carried to mundane restrictive merits. History, fiction or poems have worldly values. But when they help us towards the topics of transcendence, we need not have an anthropomorphic disposition. If we bring down the eternal pastimes, the character of the transcendence is proselytized more or less to our sensuous purpose, a solemn offense which we should not do. Our intellectual advancement has proved the three different ways of attaining to our different goals. 1. One track is known as fruitive track, to propitiate deities, to meet and fulfill our demands by physical and mental entities. The dearth of desired objects keeps us at a lower level, and we want an amelioration and elevation from the lowest level to the highest summit. In that case, we consider ourselves to be actors or perpetrators of our intended actions. When we are actuated by such exciting mood, we entertain a definite result which can serve our purpose best. This activity of our physical and mental entities is strictly confined in temporal and inadequate phases. 2. The quest of a different track is insistently urged on our intellectual function when we want to desert the fructifying demeanor of the mind. Desertion from the active life shows us a different track of seeking the absolute intelligence by the process of intellectualism. We want to sever our pleasure-seeking aptitude and our passionate desires to destroy all sorts of selfishness accrued in nature's temporary association. Renunciation from all temporal activities in this plane of deformities offers us a mentality of stupefaction which may be termed as abnegation. In the artificial process of dissociating ourselves from the temporarily meddlings with foreign things which are set apart from our entity, the actor merges himself in the object pursued, dismissing his active functions. This conglomeration is effected by the synthetic process of grouping together limited things into an accumulative effect. But the accumulation of diametrically opposite elements would never alone yield an opposite element, save in the analogy of enhanced angularities, as in the case of two right angles. The neutral position of unalloyed intellectualism would lead us to the result of the extended idea of limitation. Speculative method of synthetical activities terminates in undifferenced situation of knower, knowledge, and the object of knowledge. 3. But the advancement would prove that the track of transcendental devotion towards the Absolute is quite free from the summation of the fruitive activities, as well as the desertion from having a selfish desire to get a lion's share as a co-sharer. The tracks of elevation and salvation have very little to do in leading to the track of devotion, as the devotional process has no object of encouraging the fruitive activities and extricating out the brigaded transcendental eternal situation. The very process of salvation indicates in time the two different predicaments of the situation, which is a bar to the purpose of eternity. The devotional process is quite independent of the two systems of fruit seekers or enjoyers and abnegators or avoiders of self-destructive enjoyment. Readers will no doubt secure the true rationalistic view from the writings of this author. Pure devotional aptitude need not wait for any help from the two other tracks, but is quite independent of them. Devotion can only be carried out when the unalloyed position of the soul is determined. Such function should have no component of two other foreign garments which have more or less enshrouded the unalloyed soul in the two planes of association and dissociation with temporal things. The devotional functions of the unalloyed soul need not be observed by placing patches of clouds which are adaptable for the limited plane, eclipsing the true aspects of the true eternal plane of devotion. The absolute knowledge should not bear any reference of deviation, and whenever there is the different views, we find that the different aspects deprive us of the exact entity of the thing by our polytheistic views of the one thing. The absolute truth is ever ready to welcome the different approaches of the atomic parts of the unalloyed absolute. But when those atomic parts are mixed up with foreign views, they need not be dovetailed with the absolute like unalloyed entities associated with the unalloyed absolute. The distorted demeanor of the mind cannot approach the unalloyed absolute by the easygoing mandate of receiving all sorts of services that may be rendered to the one. But that one need not have a disfigured entity which is far off his original beautiful and sublime existence. If the object of our approaching be considered to be contaminated with evil associations inviting our nefarious aptitude of enjoyment, we cannot expect to include ourselves to submit to his wishes. First of all, the object need not be tampered in any way by our whimsical mood, and our determination of self need not accompany any anthropomorphic deformities which have no bearing in him. The different relations we experience in society should be carefully watched in the case of associating ourselves with the eternal absolute. We need not carry the defect and unpleasant pains along with us when we trace out our eternal relations with him. The absolute knowledge need not undergo the brigaded form of the enjoyable articles, sentient and insentient, we meet here. But we are to approach him with our serving mood for his eternal enjoyment. We must not be thinking of eliminating all foreign attributions in us unless we mean to please him by considering ourselves to be exactly suiting to his purpose, which may not be proving to create his annoyance as we experience on this painful plane here. A close reading of the accounts of Sri Krishna Chaitanya will certainly lead us to the manifestation of the Absolute in proper order. If we have a sincere heart to associate ourselves with the Absolute, we must not be considering him to be our servitor, but we should pose ourselves in the position of a servitor to suit one of his relationships. Our entities will then be different ingredients of the service holders of the Absolute. But as we are in the habit of securing enjoyments as lords, we have got a quite different determination of self as to lord it over other existences besides our own. In order to set right this awkward taste, we should approach a true serving friend who can regulate our evil propensities, which are the bars of the true functions of the unalloyed soul. We cannot make profit by the association of the people who are very busy to culture their wrong habits as enjoyers of this world, instead of eliminating the undesirable inculcations of associating with temporal things. The company of non-devotees and the counsels of apathetic disposition towards the Absolute should by all means be avoided. If we fail to get rid of such intoxicants, we are liable to miss the devotional functions of the unalloyed soul, without making any progress towards the march for our eternal welfare. The question of occupation has been decided by the personality of the Supreme Lord in the all-time engagement of all individual souls proper for the Absolute. The occupation of the mind is found to meddle with temporal objects of phenomena, whereas the parts of the body have no other suitable position to fit themselves for limited and temporal purposes. All acts should tend to acquire virtue and happiness. All virtues and happinesses should lead to sacrifice instead of captivating the soul for mundane purposes only. All such dissociating mood with worldly sensuous attainment tends to the occupation of the Absolute, and this occupation should be no other function but go to show the interest of the Absolute. The very conception of the external structure and the internal existence, which is also considered as a subtle garment, must not forfeit the interest of the principle who is known to own these two environments. The interest of the principle, soul, should have no ephemeral acquisition like the consumption of the mind and the body. Altruism may prove to suffice for the higher aims of soul, but such deluding features should not bar the progress of the soul in any way. The body and the mind are shifting agents which, though at present incorporated with the soul, tend to the temporary aggrandizement of the incorporated changeable parts. So attention should be drawn to the interest of the soul proper, whose functions should not at all be crippled by the seeming necessaries of the mind and the body revolting against the eternal blissful knowledge, viz., the Absolute. Our all-time occupation need not be confined to the highest reference of mental culture in pure and simple altruism, where the reference of the Absolute along with the reference of our behavior towards the lower creation is neglected. The inclusion of an indirect service to an impersonal God, or our charitable disposition to some extent towards lower animals by tutored sympathizing mentality, is optional and not compulsory. The great Absolute should predominate over the crippled forms of infinitesimal absolutes who may appear at the outset as illustrations of non-absolute. If the synthetic process of all isolated entities does not go to one undeviated object of the Absolute, it would prove to be a chaotic emporium of unassimilating differences. So our mentalities require rectification to arrange their order in a particular line. One of our friendly co-sharers should come forward to explain before us the nature of the course that should be adopted for our methodic comprehension of the irregularities in one line. This unparalleled mercy of the one friend and his associates is to regulate the disorderly conduct of the body and the mind. The rhetorical principle of the predominating and predominated functions in their bases of activities could give us the result of one of the four ingredients that follow when we are relieved of the worldly deformed conceptions in the pure spontaneity of a defined nature of eternal relationship that exists between the Absolute and the significatory aspects of the internal parts of the Absolute. Whenever the specification of the predominator is prominent, we necessarily find the reciprocal predominated aspects, which may prove to be more than one, as distinguished from the case of the predominator. The predominating agent has a singular significance over the multifarious predominated. This portion of the analysis of the transcendental integer has become the most conspicuous explanation offered to mankind by any of the guiding leaders to bring us towards the transcendence. Earnest readers will no doubt find this unique explanation offered by the writer in the line of instructions received by him from the transcendental hero, whose career and accounts have been portrayed in this book. The peculiar feature noticed in men apart from the lower creation is this, that the former can exchange thoughts and have the superiority of utilizing their experience through the recollections from history and acquired branches of knowledge. They can show their felicitous mood in listening to scriptures also. So a comparative student can easily demarcate the line of the best and full apart from transitory experiences of this world. The question of eternity, full knowledge and bliss cannot be dealt by other agencies of life save man. So man need not neglect the position of the absolute in the ever-existence, in full knowledge void of all sorts of ignorance and ills that flesh is heir to, and beatific constancy of the fountainhead. The solution of human life should tend towards the approach of the Absolute, who is always courting us to offer his help towards the fulfillment of the inadequate specialty we have in us. And in order to gain an approach we should require the guidance of an individual in whom we can place our reliance, instead of being credulous with the strugglers of this world. The Supreme Lord has left in this world a band of his followers who are always helpful to mankind, instead of deluding the intellectuals to turn themselves idealists and evildoers with an apparent phase of seekers of their welfare. The author will no doubt be gratified if any of the readers can see his way to scrutinize the subject of the transcendence in whom we are all vitally interested by sparing his valuable time to go through this book. Before concluding this foreword, I would like to introduce to the respected readers the aspiring attitude of enlightening his readers on the transcendental entity of Sri Krishna, as well as his phase of instructor in Sri Krishna Caitanya, in the following points, with references to the context. And all the references are to chapter and verse of the 10th skandha of Srimad Bhagavatam. Krishna is possessed of an unlimited intellect, 84:22. Krishna is inaccessible to sensuous knowledge, L646. Krishna is Lord of the infinity of worlds, 69 L7. Krishna wields the power of creating the unlimited, 87:28. Krishna carries the impress of limitless power, 87 L4. Krishna is possessed of inconceivable potency, L029. Krishna is unborn, 59:28, 74:21. Krishna solves all heterogeneous views, 74:24. Krishna is vanquished by exclusive devotion, L43. Krishna is inner guide, L7. Krishna is the withholder of the energy of the wicked, 60:19. Krishna is the giver of salvation to jivas that are free from vanity, 86:48. Krishna ordains the worldly course of conceited jivas, 86:48. Krishna is primal God, Deva, 40L. Krishna is primal person, Purusha, 63:38. Krishna is overwhelming flood of bliss, 83:4. Krishna possesses fulfilled desire, 47:46. Krishna is self-delighted, 60:20. Krishna is the opponent of the sensuous, 60:35. Krishna is sung by the best of hymns, 86:23. Krishna is the dispeller of the night of pseudo-religion, 14:40. Krishna is devoid of increase and decrease, 48:26. Krishna is efficient and material cause, L029. Krishna is the only truth, L423. Krishna is a warder of the fruit of work, 49:29. Krishna is not subject to the consequences of work, 84:17. Krishna is the seer of cause and effect, 38L2. Krishna is the person who is time, 17. Krishna is time as himself, 70:26. Krishna is even the time of time, 56:27. Krishna is present in the heart of every animate entity, like fire inside wood, 46:36. Krishna is grateful, 48:26. Krishna is the augmenter, like the full moon, of the ocean of earth, gods, twice born and animals, L440. Krishna is the tormentor of cannibalistic persons, 1440. Krishna is the destroyer of the pride of the arrogant, 60:19. Krishna is the root cause of the origin, etc., of the world, 14:23. Krishna is the cause of the world, 40L. Krishna is the creator of the world, 70:38. Krishna appears as if possessed of a body like that of mundane entities, for the good of the world, L455. Krishna is the guru, center of gravity, of the world, 8044. Krishna is the refuge, ashra, of jivas, individual souls, who are afraid of birth and death, 49L2. Krishna is devoid of birth, 46:38. Krishna is equally the internal guide, cause and director of jivas, 87:30. Krishna is the destroyer of the miseries of persons who employ themselves in meditating upon him, 58L0. Krishna is of the fourth dimension and self-manifest, 66:38. Krishna is worthy of being gifted, 74:24. Krishna is the punisher of the wicked. 69L7. Krishna is the god of gods. 8044. Krishna is rarely cognizable by the gods. 4827. Krishna is unconcerned about body, house, etc. 6020. Krishna is the supreme ruler of the greatest gods. 73.8. Krishna is the exponent of religion. 6940. Krishna is the eternal son of Nanda. L4L. Krishna is visible to man with great difficulty. 7123. Krishna's presence mocks the world of men. 7040. Krishna is the object of palatable drink of the human eye. 7133. Krishna is the internal guide of all. 3L4. Krishna is worthy of the worship of all the worlds. 6915. Krishna accommodates all the worlds. 5930. Krishna is the manifester of all light. 6334. Krishna is instinted in giving himself away to one who recollects him. 80LL. Krishna is the efficient cause. 8750. Krishna, although devoid of all mundane quality, assumes mundane qualities by his inconceivable power for the purposes of creation, etc. 4640. Krishna is not subject to change. 6429. Krishna is not capable of discrimination by reason of being void of any extraneous covering. 8729. Krishna is the giver of himself to those who covet nothing. 8633. Krishna loves those who covet nothing. 6014. Krishna does no work. 6020. Krishna is human, hidden, primal person. Purusha. 4413. Krishna is present in the hearts of jivas like the five elements. 8245. Krishna is the supreme sorcerer. 7037. Krishna is supreme Godhead and the internal guide of all. 5627. Krishna is the crest jewel of those whose praises are sung by the sacred lore. 7130. Krishna is primal person and ever existing. 1423. Krishna is the highest among the objects of worship. 7419. Krishna is the healer of the miseries of the submissive. 7316. Krishna is the destroyer of the sins of the submissive. 31:7. Krishna is the destroyer of the distress of the submissive. 73:8. Krishna is the residue after the cataclysm. 87:15. Krishna is devoid of touch with mundane senses. 87:28. Krishna is the soul and friend of all animate entities. 29:32. Krishna is devoid of distinction appertaining to an alien. 63:38-44. Krishna is inconceivable by his nature. 70:38. Krishna is the master of the universe. 70:37. Krishna is the nourisher of the universe. 85:5. Krishna is the sun that cheers the lotus of the kindred of the Vrishnis. 1440. Krishna is the god worshipped by the Brahmanas. 69:15. Krishna is the foremost of the Brahmanas. 84:20. Krishna is the originator of Brahma. 41. Krishna is the worshipped of Brahma. 31:13. Krishna loves his devotees. 48:26. Krishna wears forms in accordance with the wishes of his devotee. 59:25. Krishna is eternally present in Mathura. 128. Krishna is devoid of the sense of kinship and regards all in the same way. 46:37. Krishna is beyond all measuring potency. Maya. 63:26. Krishna is subdued by the love of Yudhishthira. 72:10. Krishna is concealed by the screen of Maya from the sight of the people. 84:23. Krishna does not follow the ways of the world. 60:36. Krishna is the destroyer of the fear of the mundane sojourn of the submissive. 85:19. Krishna is the womb of the scriptures. 16:44. 80:45. 84:20. Krishna is Sri Guru's himself. 80:33. Krishna is devoid of hankering for wife, offspring, etc. 60:20. Krishna is the ordainer of the worldly sojourn and of the Samambanam. 1:7. Krishna is the cause of all entities. 8514. Krishna is the friend of the good. 69:17. Krishna is devoid of discrimination as of kinship. 63:38-44. Krishna is existence. 56:27. Krishna possesses true discernment. 80:44. Krishna is the true entity. 87:17. Krishna is true of speech. 48:26. Krishna is true of resolve. 37:12. Krishna sees with an equal eye. 16:33. Krishna is the cause of all causes. 14:56-57-63-38-87-16. Krishna is the originator of all. 59:28. Krishna is the soul's himself of all jivas, individual souls. 14:55. Krishna is omniscient. 16:48. Krishna is all-seeing. 38:18. Krishna is the embodiment of all gods, 74:19, 86:54. Krishna is the seer of all, 16:48. Krishna is the Lord of all, 37:23. Krishna is the stay, ashra, of all entities, 82:46. Krishna is all-pervasive and eternal, 9:13. Krishna is the soul of all elements, 86:31. Krishna is the knower of the minds of all elements, 81:1. Krishna is the soul's self of all elements, 74:24. Krishna is the inner soul of all elements, 37:11. Krishna is the internal guide of all elements, 47:29. Krishna is the cause of the origin of all elements, 64:29. Krishna is the limit of all good, 84:21. Krishna is omnipotent, 37:12. Krishna is the Lord of Lakshmi, the presiding deity of all riches, 47:46. Krishna is the internal guide of all, 63:38, 72:6. Krishna is the stay, ashra, of all, 40:15. Krishna is witness and seer of self, 86:31. Krishna is the refuge of the good, 89. Krishna is most difficult to serve, 88:11. Krishna is the friend of one's heart, 48:26. Krishna is the withholder of creation, 82:45. Krishna is withholder, creator and preserver, 63:44. Krishna is the master of the functions of creation, etc. 16:49-37:12. Krishna is devoid of distinction as of kinship, 74:21. Krishna is devoid of distinction as between kin and alien, 72:6. Krishna indwells the universe created by himself, 48:19. Krishna is satisfied by the taste of his self-delight, 72:6. Krishna is the destroyer of the worldly sojourn of his devotees, 60:43. Krishna is the wearer of body according to his wish, 1:7. Shri Krishna Chaitanya Math, Vrindavan, Mathura. Camp Office of the Circumambulation Siddhanta Saraswati of the Circle of Brahma, Mathura, UP. 24th November. 1932 Volume I, Introductory I. Object and Method. The present work is an attempt to offer a theistic account in the English language of the career and teachings of Sri Chaitanya. The number of existing English books on the subject is very small. The Life and Precepts of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu by Thakur Bhaktivinoda Jrs. January, 1897, p. 130. The book can be had at the Gaudiya Math, Calcutta. 1. The pioneer of the movement of pure devotion in our age, although it gives a true account of his life, is a comparatively short work. Other English works on the subject are from the pens of self-sufficient misguided amateurs who have had no practical experience of the teaching they have professed to expound. This is opposed to the dictum of Sri Chaitanya that no one is fit to be a teacher of religion who does not practice the same in his own life. None of these works, with the solitary exception of that by Thakur Bhaktivinoda, deals properly with the spiritual side of the teachings of Sri Chaitanya. The available authoritative sources of information are quite exhaustive regarding the spiritual aspect and offer a narrative of his doings and teachings that is both consistent and free from contradictions. To these was added later another body of works of a different character by pedantic pseudo-Vaishnava and faithless foreign writers that offer the concoctions of their own respective lines of thought. Insincere writers have adopted without apology the point of view and garbled accounts of the pseudo-Vaishnava authors as the basis of their narratives. The existing English works, although they sometimes profess to be historical, in reality offer a superficial, extremely crude and misleading view of the subject. They confine themselves almost exclusively to the esoteric issues. This at least is not the method of the source books, but a departure from the bona fide position of the theme itself. The historical method proper should aim at presenting the religion as it is really found in the genuine original sources and in the spirit of its first propounders. But many of these writers, due to their empirical training, have failed to observe this essential canon of historical judgment. Moreover, these writers generally happen to be very poorly equipped in respect of their knowledge of the vast body of scriptures to which the teachings of Sri Chaitanya stand in the closest relationship. And, even if any of them happen to possess a general acquaintance with the texts of these scriptures, they fail to take a scientific view of the subject due to lack of spiritual insight. The prominent defect that mar the value of these works are the purely empiric point of view of their authors, their want of spiritual knowledge of the scriptures, and their lack of critical caution in the choice and use of authorities. The empiric method is unsuitable for the treatment of a spiritual subject. The vision of the empiricist is confined to things of this world. The Vaishnava authors on whose narratives we have to base our account of Sri Caitanya were not empiricists. The subject of which they have left us the account is the absolute, as distinct from the empiric, truth that comes down to them in the chain of disciplic succession from Godhead himself. They acquired this esoteric vision, when they proved to be true, by the methods of loyal submission and sincere service at the feet of spiritual preceptors as enjoined by the scriptures on all those who desire to obtain spiritual enlightenment. They are never tired of repeating that the absolute truth inherent in a bona fide soul who expresses himself in their books is not derived from any experience of this world and is not intelligible to those whose vision is obscured by knowledge derived from the experience of this world. The absolute truth is transcendental and, therefore, no human being can attain to him by his sensuous efforts, i.e., by the ascending process, as all phenomena that are exposed to the faulty, limited senses are, by this virtue, non-transcendental. The absolute truth is eternally existent but is not realizable by men so long as they are not relieved of the aptitude of their defective vision. The absolute truth is to be received, undoubtedly in the spirit of honest inquiry, from those wise men who bear no reference to the world of their sensuous gratification. Very few of the existing English works on Sri Caitanya satisfy these essential conditions of theistic authorship that are so strongly insisted upon by these devotional writers, without which such description carries no useful purpose. On the contrary, these later writers are apt to offer their own views, derived from their empiric association, regarding the subject matter of the original works, in a manner that leaves on the mind of the reader the impression that they are more anxious to point out the crudities and errors of these old authors than exhibit their views in a scientific and impartial manner. This is certainly neither history nor religion, but only an uncalled for and useless distortion of both. The object of writing this book is to place before the English-knowing readers a strictly accurate theistic account of Sri Caitanya, who teaches the absolute truth that has been handed down through the ages by an unbroken succession of unbiased spiritual preceptors. This narrative is broad-based on all the authoritative sources and seeks to fully present the esoteric side as explaining the esoteric in pursuance of the method of all really enlightened writers on spiritual subjects. The superiority of Sri Caitanya to all other teachers and prophets consists in this, that he made fully known the absolute truth who was only partially unveiled by others. This is the special significance of Sri Caitanya's deeds and teachings. Other teachers of the religion before him had allowed more or less the worship of non-Godhead, having had reference and adulteration of their present deformities. Sri Caitanya came into this world to make all people understand that in reference to their eternal existence they should have nothing to do with non-Godhead. Sri Caitanya, who speaks the language, is the absolute truth in his full manifestation. He has made people understand the only true way of approaching Godhead himself. This is the proof that he is Godhead himself. He is identical with Sri Krishna, not himself as Lord and proprietor of all things, but in the attitude of the agony of separation from the absolute, i.e., himself. Sri Krishna opposed all addiction to ephemeral thoughts and activities. This has been communicated to us through the channel of unbiased preceptors who have no other interest except delivering intact the whole of the truth received by them. The absolute truth is sure to be obscured if he is handled by elevationists and salvationists, karmans and jnanins, i.e., by those who believe in worldly activities and in freedom from misery by means of knowledge gradually gained through the senses. We do not want to learn about the absolute truth from these. It is only the pencils of ray emanating from the sun when they happen to be received by the retina that enable one to see the sun directly even from a long distance. But we must be very careful that nothing foreign interposes between the eye and the sun, thus obstructing the passage of the ray and preventing it from reaching the eye. This is the epistemology of absolute knowledge offered by Sri Caitanya. It is followed in the brochure of Thakur Bhaktivinod referred to above. My object is only to elaborate what is told briefly in that little book and elaborated in the Bhagavatam and Charitamrita. The peculiarity of my position, therefore, consists in this, that I shake off the views of the schools of mundane elevationists and salvationists, the professors of temporary enjoyments, bhakti, and permanent release from misery attendant upon such enjoyment, losing in the process the idea of the individual self itself, mukti, for the reason that they do not lead to the absolute truth. We are absolutists. We believe that our only duty is to follow the absolute who has his own eternal plane to stand. We hold that the most intelligent among the contemporaries of Sri Caitanya, those who sincerely followed him, really understood his teaching through serving love. This truth which they received from Sri Caitanya himself has been communicated to my preceptor by a succession of sincere followers of the Absolute Truth reaching back to them. Each one of this succession of preceptors submitted to the conditions of sincere pupillage to his predecessors, enabling the latter to impart to him the truth by the eradication of temporary, local errors and misconceptions that might crop up in unguided critics. Due to this careful transmission of the full truth through unbiased preceptors to my unprejudiced preceptor, I should rightly claim him to be a contemporary of Sri Gaur Sundar himself. Other lines of teachers who deviate from my preceptor are absolutists only to an extent. Had they been fully absolutist, they would have come under the banner of the line of absolute truth, which has no affinity of deviating from the absolute proper. My preceptor, out of his unlimited mercy, which I craved, brought me to his path by himself coming to me and dissuading me from following other ways and means of language that would be intelligible to me in my then condition. There is thus in my case a direct preceptorial connection extending right up to the living sources undisturbed by physical or mental obstruction. The line of the absolutists has prevented us from going astray in any other direction but to embrace absolutism, and has given us this careful training. I am a regulated being and do not belong to the empiric school, as I keep not any view of deserting this line to join the challengers. My preceptors have been free from mundane references, being treaders of the path of the absolute. We are discussing the deeds of Sri Caitanya in the light of our preceptors. But our preceptors did not tell us this thing in the present form and language. Linguistically it is our maiden effort. We do not know whether we shall one else succeed in this. We, however, claim to have received this narrative from the living sources. Only the strict followers of Sri Caitanya can obtain the full view of the absolute truth. It cannot be had by the followers of any other teacher who has a different angle of vision. All other lines only offer a partial view. Sri Radha Govinda, the full truth, is attainable only on this path. I should be a sincere follower of my preceptor and of the preceptors of my preceptor, and have no intention of deviating from my preceptors. There is no chance of foreign element getting into my account. There is no hypocrisy. The only thing that is new is that I am trying to tell it through the medium of a different diction and language, which happen to be different from those of my preceptors. In this connection it will not be out of place to refer to subtle and unconscious prejudices that stand in the way of our giving a real hearing to a purely spiritual subject. The life and teachings of Sri Caitanya are not the special concern of any narrow sect. The knowledge of it is claimed to be indispensable for the whole animate and inert world, inasmuch as Sri Caitanya is the living embodiment of the highest and the most intimate distinctive forms of the service of the Supreme Lord, to which every being has a claim by his constituent principle. The service of Godhead, however, has no affinity with anything of this transitory world, as in the case of meddling with non-God conception. The readers of the transcendental deeds, Leela, of Sri Caitanya may be divided into three classes, viz. Those who read for the satisfaction of idle curiosity. 2. Those who read for gathering empiric knowledge to suit their taste and to mold the same accordingly. And 3. Lastly, those readers who are really seekers of the absolute truth as distinct from the empirical, i.e., who sincerely avail themselves of the full opportunity of their reading. We need not stop to consider the case of that class of readers, the dilettantes and mere litterateurs who read for the satisfaction of idle curiosity. Those readers who will approach the subject in a real spirit of inquiry may take up one of two possible attitudes. Some of these may consider the subject as one that is capable of being understood in the light of worldly experience like any non-spiritual subject. Such persons will accept only those portions of this work which may appear to them to agree with their existing convictions. But as these convictions, in the case of empiricists, happen to be themselves based on the experience of this world, which is changeable, they are in their nature only relative and not absolute truth. Those convictions are in fact unspiritual and, instead of helping, prevent us from understanding the absolute. Those readers who, failing to grasp this real difference between the spiritual and the physical and mental, may try to understand the subject with the help of their empiric knowledge, are bound to be dissatisfied as they proceed with this study, and the net result of their labor in going through these pages may be even to confirm them more strongly in their empiric, i.e., unspiritual, attitude. The object of study in such case will be entirely missed. That class of sincere readers who, recognizing the difference between the empiric and the spiritual truth, are inclined to seek for the latter only in these pages and may be prepared for the purpose to disregard, at least for the time being, the clamorous opposition of their empiric convictions, and are thus in a position to give the narrative a patient and sympathetic hearing, will be thereby enabled to understand gradually the reason why the most sincerely religious people happen to cherish the subject of this work with such tender and absorbing devotion. It is not possible to enter into the spirit of a subject unless a really patient hearing is given to it. But it is very difficult to submit with patience to listen to a subject that is declared to be situated completely beyond the scope of all experience and convictions of the hearer. The ordeal that faces us on the threshold of spiritual life is truly formidable. It is only such people who combine openness of mind with a sincere desire to know not the empiric, changeable, relative, but the absolute, unchainable, eternal truth, that are enabled by the grace of Godhead to listen patiently to a spiritual narrative which appears to be almost needless from the point of view of the empiricist. The transcendental career and teachings of Sri Caitanya are bound to prove to be of the highest interest to all sincere seekers of spiritual enlightenment. The fact that Sri Caitanya appears to be born in Bengal need not mislead those readers who belong to a different country into supposing that his teachings are meant for the people of Bengal or of India, of this or of a former age. It is difficult for most to free their minds completely from national, ethnological or chronological prejudices in these days of militant nationalism and empiricism. But the real meaning of the career of Sri Caitanya will be missed if he be regarded merely from any mundane point of view, viz. That of race or nationality, limited time or limited space, physical bearing, intellectual endowment, caste, creed or color, etc. His teaching and activities belong to the plane of the absolute which transcends all the petty and unwholesome limitations of our worldly existence. Let the sympathetic reader lay aside these subtle and unconscious prejudices and allow the eternal truth to enter the mind thus opened out to him, without hastily passing the final judgment by a mere cursory look at the title page. Whatever the quarter from which the absolute truth enters his appearance, and, in this matter his choice is free, the absolute truth when he actually knocks at our door should be assured the unreserved welcome that is his due from those who really seek for him. The sincere reader need also be on his guard against specific misconceptions at the very outset of an unfavorable kind. The deeds and teachings of Sri Caitanya have been consciously or unconsciously misrepresented by most modern writers. We have already referred to this fact. Any idea, favorable or unfavorable, regarding Sri Caitanya that the reader may have already formed from the writings of these authors or their partisans may be temporarily laid aside to allow of an impartial hearing being given to the present narrative. Dogmatism, superstition or self-sufficiency can never lead to spiritual progress. Our readers are much more likely to gain what they require if they do not reserve any contrary thought which is likely to receive these tidings coldly or present them from taking up a sympathetic and inquiring attitude. The advice is to stop temporarily any conception that they may have already formed and even to dismantle an awkward construction that may lie across the path of their following the course of the narrative with seriousness of purpose. The message of the transcendental realm that has come down to this phenomenal world through the medium of sound is known as the Veda, i.e., knowledge, or as the Shruti, i.e., that which is heard, as the ear alone of all the organs of sense is fit to receive the distant message which is transmissible only in the form of sound. The absolute truth, for the simple reason that he happens to be located beyond the reach of our physical senses, cannot be directly perceived by us. All the other senses, viz. Those of touch, sight, smell, taste require, as the condition of perceiving any object, actual contact with the same. But the ear possesses this special peculiarity that it can perceive an object in subtle form without being in gross material contact with it. As for example, it is possible to hear about London from Calcutta by means of the ear. It is not possible to learn anything about London from Calcutta in the same natural way, by means of any other sense. The scriptures, i.e., writings, are but the visualized, revealed transcendental sounds. Therefore it is not so extraordinary as it seems at first sight that of all our present organs the ear alone should be privileged to receive the message of the Absolute. The transcendental sound is, however, different from ordinary sound inasmuch as it is identical with the object denoted by it, while the object denoted by the latter is different as object from the sound which is a symbol to signify the object without itself being the object. The identity of the transcendental sound with the object denoted by such sound is due to the fact that everything on the transcendental plane happens to be an entity of incomprehensible infinite dimensions. This is not submitted to the present limited understanding of man, which is strictly limited to entities of 3 dimensions only. The transcendental truth possesses unity and is infinite by his nature. All this is contrary to our limited reason, and so accustomed we are to the rationale of limited experience that it appears to us to be therefore irrational. Unless this really irrational opposition of our finite reason is temporarily stopped, it will effectively bar all access to the real infinite. But once the voice of Godhead is allowed really to enter our attentive ear, he will purify our perverted reason and render it fit to appreciate that which in its present degraded state it is unfit to understand. Let us, therefore, assume for the present that an wholesome heterogeneity is not possible in the Absolute, who is altogether unitary in his character. The rational necessity of revelation for our knowledge of the Absolute should be perfectly clear. The alternative to this are the multifarious spurious theories regarding the Absolute that have been put forward from time to time by the human mind. These man-made theories are, and can be, neither conclusive in themselves nor in agreement with one another. They are liable to constant modification with the progress of empiric knowledge. These wrong theories can never lead us to the absolute truth, who admits no such self-contradiction as is inevitable with empiricists. The word of Gaudiya Das revealed in the Veda, i.e., by means of the recorded transcendental sound, has been, and will ever remain, the only rationally possible source of all human knowledge regarding the substantive nature of the infallible reality. There is thus nothing irrational ab initio in holding that the Veda is the word of Godhead himself. The Veda exists from eternity. The Veda, according to his own version, was originally revealed in this world to Sri Brahma, the first jiva to appear in the realm of physical nature, and by him made available to other jivas that have since made their appearance in this world in course of time through the channel of disciplic spiritual succession. The Veda contains the absolute truth, whose service is the eternal and universal function of the proper nature of all entities. Not being made by anyone, the Veda is free from all taint of narrowness, error, or partiality. The path to which he points is the only one that should be trod by every soul if he wants to walk in the way of truth. It is necessary to put off all prejudices against the authority of the revealed scriptures arising out of misapprehension of the nature of the subject. The admission of the supreme authority of the Veda does not involve the utter annihilation of thinking. On the contrary, it is the absolute truth who enables us to find the real value of empiric thought and its relation to ourselves. Nor does the acceptance of the Veda involve the rejection of the scriptures of other countries. The revealed portions of all the scriptures are one and the same. They are the word of Godhead, differing only in the degree of manifestation. This oneness of all revelation will become clearer in course of this narrative. The Veda is self-existent and eternal. It was not made by anybody. It has the quality of attracting to itself the devoted homage of all sincere souls. Men of this world love a thing by reason of its worldly benefits for themselves. There is nothing in the shape of worldly value to explain the acceptance of the Veda by the most sincere seekers of the truth. It is as if one is irresistibly attracted towards a chance passerby and welcomes him into one's house by a spontaneous instinct. No extraneous circumstance, no previously found ties, would explain this spontaneous liking. It must be entirely due to some innate excellence in the object of such attachment. The Veda has ever been loved in this impartial and detached attitude. Theories that are made can mislead inasmuch as they attempt to substitute the convictions of their authors in place of those of others. It is the substitution of one untruth in place of another, due to the vanity or spite of clever or aggressive thinkers. There is no room for impartiality in such case. The absolute truth alone is really impartial. His impartiality is the cause of the acceptance of his service by sincere souls. The absolute truth, who finds implicit expression in the Vedas and the Upanishads, has been put into a systematic and more explicit form in the Brahma Sutra of Sri Vyasadeva. In this remarkable work, the subject has been treated under the four heads of L. Relationship of everything with Godhead, 2. Solution of apparent heterogeneity that is found in nature, 3. The means of spiritual realization, and 4. The object of spiritual function. The Brahma Sutra establishes the existence of personal Godhead and devotion as the means of realizing transcendental love for Gaudiya Das, the final object of such activity. The authority of the Brahma Sutra, as part and parcel of the revealed scriptures, is admitted by all transcendentalists. The chain of disciplic succession in the case of Sri Vyasadeva is as follows. Sri Vyasadeva received the word from Sri Narada, who received it from Sri Brahma, the first god representing the bound creation, to whom it was communicated by Sri Narayana himself, i.e., personality of Gaudiya Das. He exists in Sri Vaikuntha, the realm that is free from all limitation. The Brahma Sutra gives us the truth in a highly condensed form. It is the textbook of all theistic philosophy. The conclusions embodied in it and their significance have been elaborated in a number of commentaries written by different authors. Sri Vyasadeva is also the author of the Srimad Bhagavatam, which gives us the comprehensive history of the transcendental activities of Godhead himself and of his different avatars. The deeds of Sri Krishna, who is declared by the Veda to be Godhead himself, as he is, constitute the central theme of this great work. The Srimad Bhagavatam thus forms, as it were, the natural commentary, in the concrete or explicit form, of the Brahma Sutra, from the pen of their common author. The deeds of Sri Caitanya, the subject of the present work, are the living embodiment of the teaching of Srimad Bhagavatam. The deeds and teachings of Sri Caitanya stand alone as history of the service of the Supreme Lord in the form of the deepest and perfectly unreserved intimacy. The privilege of this form of service, the hidden truth of all scriptures, was never before given to the fallen jiva. In the words of Sri Rupa Goswami Prabhu, the authority on the esoteric significance of the deeds of Sri Caitanya, God himself with the beautiful golden complexion out of mercy appeared in this world in this most degenerate age to confer the grace of devotion to himself, of the superior order that had not been given to this world before. Even the Gita, which teaches the service of Godhead with single-minded devotion and in the spirit of complete self-surrender, does not tell us much about the actual, concrete form of the highest service. The Srimad Bhagavatam describes all different kinds of service in the concrete form and establishes the supreme excellence of that which was practiced by the transcendental milkmaids of Brahma. Sri Caitanya is the living embodiment of this highest and most intimate form of the service of the divinity. The Vrindavana pastimes of Sri Krishna, which have been given the place of honor in the greatest devotional work of the whole world, are of all forms of divine service the one that is also liable to be most grossly misunderstood. The subject will be treated in greater detail in its proper place in the body of this work. It will suffice for our purpose here to state that Sri Caitanya made clearly manifest by his deeds and teachings what this form of service really means. His deeds are in fact the Brahma Sutra, Gita and the Srimad Bhagavatam displayed to our view in the living form. He is the living Vedanta. Other avatars and prophets have taught the reverential worship of the Supreme Lord. Sri Caitanya proved by his deeds that the highest form of service is to be found in the Srimad Bhagavatam, that its inner meaning had not been properly understood up to his time by anybody, and that it offers what all the scriptures have been endeavoring from eternity unsuccessfully to express. Sri Caitanya's own career is the concrete living expression of this highest form of the service of the Lord. The deeds and teachings of Sri Caitanya offer everything that is contained in the whole body of the scriptures of this country or of any country. They give us the complete view of the Absolute, which is not to be found in any scripture. And because it is the full view of the absolute truth that we get that the deeds and teachings of Sri Caitanya possess the quality of solving all doubts and difficulties. It has the power of delivering from the thraldom of this limited existence the elevationists who base their hope for mankind on worldly activities, and also the empiric philosopher who is caught in the cobweb of his own ephemeral speculations. It throws open the gates of the limitless world to all sorts and conditions of people by simply presenting the complete view of the truth, which reconciles all apparent contradictions and composes all the seeming differences and discords that so trouble the material world, and, in their place, it establishes the reign of universal spiritual harmony. No apology is needed from the historian of the deeds of Sri Caitanya for anything in his transcendental career. His deeds and teachings, as we find them recorded in the immortal works of his associates and followers, are not the concoctions of the human imagination. Anyone who reads these sublime works with an open mind is bound to be convinced of the absolute reality of all those activities. The task of the historian of Sri Caitanya is rather not to miss the least detail of his divine career. This may not appeal to the taste of those historians whose vision is incapable of passing the line of secular interests, but they nevertheless constitute the most momentous facts of theistic history and are, in fact, the goal to which all history leads and in which it should find its supreme fulfillment and real explanation. The pseudo-Vedantists are specially liable to underestimate the significance of the concrete activities of personal Gaudiya Das constituting his fullest manifestation. According to them, the Vedanta is a mere theory of the absolute and is, like any product of mental speculation, an abstract subject. Although such view is clearly opposed to that of Sri Vyasadeva himself, who would otherwise have not been at so much pains to describe minutely every detail of the activities of Godhead himself and of all his avatars, and assign to the broad pastimes of Krishna Chandra the place of honor in his comprehensive history of the divinity. This is the subtle danger that threatens all who put their trust in empiric wisdom. The deeds of Sri Caitanya are the practical refutation of all casuistry and empiric speculations regarding the absolute that are to be found in all parts of the world. The writer has ventured upon a task that is by its nature superhuman, not from any pride of empiric knowledge. This task of propagating the eternal religion of all animate beings has been handed down to him in the regular line of spiritual discipleship. It was the wish of Thakur Bhaktivinoda to spread the knowledge of the eternal religion taught and practiced by Sri Caitanya to all countries outside Bengal through the medium of the English language. The writer would be failing in his duty towards his spiritual preceptor and towards the growing community of the pure devotees who are desirous that the wish of Thakur Bhaktivinoda, the same as that of Sri Caitanya himself, should be carried out, if he did not make a sincere effort of putting into the English language information that he has received from his predecessors. The writer feels no misgiving in thus offering to the world at large this message of the absolute, inasmuch as in doing this he is only performing a duty that has devolved on his unworthy shoulders in the regular chain of disciplic succession. He makes his prostrated obeisances at the feet of the preceptor who opened his sealed eyes by the spike of the collyrium of spiritual knowledge, and all the devotees of the Supreme Lord, that the word of God may through their mercy find expression in these pages. The absolute truth cannot be discovered by the ascending effort of the human mind. Such effort, as a matter of fact, leads to quite the opposite direction. The absolute truth has been appropriately compared to the disk of the sun. It is not possible to find out the sun during night with the help of the most powerful lamp that can be devised by the ingenuity of man. The sun can be seen only by means of rays that come from itself. The sun is visible when it is above the horizon, and there is nothing to obstruct our vision directed towards it. The sun is seen easily enough when these conditions are fulfilled. The absolute truth is like the glorious disk of the sun that is always above the horizon. But we bound jivas cannot see it, as we are led by our empiric knowledge to direct our sealed eyes to the opposite direction and on the mists and clouds of worldliness that further obstruct our view. It is transcendental truth that is offered in these pages, and not any speculations of the writer. This transcendental truth, whom he has received from his preceptor and whom he is trying to impart to others, is not something that can be challenged by the limited reason of man. His predecessors have been enabled to receive him by submitting to him, i.e., by listening to and accepting him in the sense of practicing and preaching the same. This constitutes the sole justification of the present undertaking. The writer is desirous of serving the absolute truth by telling him to others, as by doing so he can serve himself and all animate beings in the only really useful way. This eternal function of the proper selves of all animate beings that has been taught by Sri Caitanya and all the revealed scriptures is at once profound and easy. It is easy because it possesses the quality of satisfying the wants of foolish, senseless and unlettered persons. It is also profound inasmuch as it is capable of benefiting the most erudite scholars, i.e., those who are masters of the art of controversy and most deeply versed in the scriptures. This combination of apparently opposite qualities is not to be found anywhere else in this world. In fact, anyone who is free from bias can be heir of this religion. On this simple condition it lies open to all mankind. The idealist, no less than the practical man of action, is equally enabled by its means to successfully cross this great ocean of limited, physical existence. But unthinking, worldly-minded people have always been misled by its perverse forms, as it has been often misrepresented by the malice, worldly interest, or ignorance of its pseudo-preachers. The only way that is open to bound jivas for disentangling themselves from the fetters of ignorance and thereby regaining their natural condition of the spontaneous, spiritual service of the Lord, is that offered by the methods of listening to the transcendental deeds of the Godhead from the lips of his devotees and making the same known to others by obeying the word of God in their actual conduct and preaching it to others. It is only by constantly listening to the word of God from those who exclusively serve the absolute and practicing the same with body, mind and speech that the fallen jivas are enabled gradually to get rid of their materialistic hallucinations which stand in their way of realizing their own proper nature and its true relationship with God, and therefore of serving him in the proper manner. The materials for the present work have been drawn from 1. The Sikshastakam of Sri Caitanya, which gives the summary of his teachings in his own words. 2 and 3. The Carcass, Memoirs of Sri Murari Gupta and of Sri Swarup Damodar, the latter as embodied in his works by Sri Raghunath Das Goswamin, Sri Swarup Damodar's closest associate. 4. Prema Vivarta of Sri Jagadananda. 5. Sri Krishna Chaitanya Chandrada Nataka of Kavi Karnapur. 6. Sri Chaitanya Charita Kavya of Sri Chaitanya Das, the elder brother of Kavi Karnapur. 7. The works of Sri Prabodhananda Saraswati. 8. The Bhajanamrita of Sri Narahari Sarkar Thakur. 9. The numerous works left by 5 of the famous 6 Goswamians. 10. Sri Brindbandas Thakur's Sri Chaitanya Bhagavat. 1. Sri Lakhandasa's Chaitanya Mangal. 12. Sri Krishnadas Kavira's Sri Chaitanya Charitamrita, and lastly, 13. The works of those later writers who have strictly followed the above authors. Most of these works are in Sanskrit, some of them in Bengali. Sri Chaitanya has not left any books written by himself. A few shlokas composed by him are quoted in the works of his associates, the chief of them being the Sikshastakam, which gives in 8 stanzas a summary of his teachings. Sri Murari Gupta was the constant companion of Sri Chaitanya's younger days. His memoirs are a careful record of the activities of Sri Chaitanya at Nabadwip. Sri Swarup Damodar attended on the person of Sri Chaitanya night and day throughout the period of his long residence at Puri. His memoirs, which have not come down to us in their separate form, are the chief authority as regards Sri Chaitanya's latter career and relied upon by all the contemporary writers. Sri Krishnadas Kavira Goswamin, in his detailed account of this part of Sri Chaitanya's career, made use of the information which he obtained directly from Sri Raghunath Das Goswamin, who was the spiritual ward of Sri Swarup Damodar, to whose charge he was committed by the express command of Sri Chaitanya himself. Pandit Jagadananda was the loved playmate of Sri Chaitanya's boyhood and his constant companion to the end. Kavi Karnapur was the son of Sri Sivananda Sen, one of the closest associates of Sri Chaitanya. Sri Chaitanyadas was the elder brother of Kavi Karnapura. Sri Prabodhananda Saraswati was the contemporary of Sri Chaitanya. He was a native of southern India and the younger brother of Sri Venkata Bhatta, at whose house at Sri Rangam Sri Chaitanya resided for the period of 4 months during his travels in the south. Sri Prabodhananda Saraswati was the uncle and preceptor of Sri Gopal Bhatta, one of the 6 Goswamians. Sri Narahari Sarkar Thakur was one of Sri Chaitanya's principal associates. Of the 6 Goswamians, Sri Rupa and his elder brother Sri Sanatana were instructed by Sri Chaitanya himself in regard to the subject matter of their respective works. Sri Raghunath Das Goswamin got his information from Sri Swarup Damodar, and he himself associated with Sri Chaitanya. Sri Gopal Bhatta's connection with Sri Chaitanya has already been mentioned. Sri Jiva was the nephew of Sri Rupa and Sanatana and was the disciple of the former. Sri Brindabandas Thakur was the recipient of the favor of Sri Nityananda, the associated facsimile, so to say, of Sri Chaitanya. His mother Sri Naryani was the niece of Sri Bhash Pandit, the foremost of those Vaishnava householders who were the direct followers of Sri Chaitanya. Sri Lakhandas got the materials of his work partly from Narahari Sarkar Thakur, one of Sri Chaitanya's close associates, and by his devotional impressions. Sri Krishnadas Goswamin got his information, as has already been mentioned, from his preceptor Sri Raghunath Das, one of the 6 Goswamians. Most of the works of the authors named above are still extant, and they are the authorities for all subsequent writers. The chief of these later authors whose works have been consulted in the compilation of the present account are 1. Sri Narottamdas Thakur, who was the disciple of Sri Lokanath Goswamin, one of the closest associates of Sri Chaitanya. 2. Sri Viswanath Chakravarti, belonging to the line of disciples of Sri Narottamdas Thakur. 3. Sri Baladev Vidyabhusan, the first Gaudiya commentator of the Brahma Sutra. 4. Sri Narahari Chakravarti, in the line of disciplic descent from Sri Viswanath Thakur. 5. Sri Bhaktivinod Thakur, the sincere guardian of the true Vaishnavas of the present day. And 6. My Sri Gurudeva, His Divine Grace Paramahansa Paribrajakarya Sri Srimat Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Goswami Mahara, whose mercy is my only hope of attaining the service of Godhead. It will be seen from the above that there is no lack of materials of the most reliable character available to the historian of the career and teachings of Sri Chaitanya. It is, therefore, rather strange that the personality of Sri Chaitanya has been misunderstood and misrepresented by a certain class of writers. The neglect of the original sources was one cause of this. A constructive motive was supplied by the animosity of Kshatriyans and the greed of worldly interests of pseudo-followers. It was the life work of Thakur Bhaktivinod to rediscover the true history of Sri Chaitanya and make the same available to the present generation. The magnitude of this service to his country, to humanity and to all animate beings time alone will show. The eternal religion taught and practiced by Sri Caitanya have been made intelligible to the modern reader by the labors of Thakur Bhaktivinoda. It is bound to react most powerfully on all existing religious convictions of the world and make possible the establishment of universal spiritual harmony of which the whole world stands so much in need. Most of the works of Thakur Bhaktivinoda were, however, written in Bengali and Sanskrit. The present work is a slight attempt to present in the English language an outline of the life and teachings of Sri Caitanya made known by Thakur Bhaktivinoda, the pioneer of the movement of pure devotion in the present age, which aims at re-establishing in practice the eternal religion of all animate beings revealed in the scriptures and taught and practiced by Sri Caitanya. The activities of my most revered preceptor are well known to the world. His divine grace is commissioned by Godhead to spread the teaching of Sri Caitanya to every village of the world and re-establish the spiritual society. This was foretold by Thakur Bhaktivinoda. The real nature of Sri Krishna. The historical aspect of Sri Krishna need not be considered as irrelevant or mundane. The Absolute is always no other than himself. Antiquarian speculations regarding the historicity of Sri Krishna have thus, inconceivably to us, an intimate bearing on the question of the real nature of the Absolute. The scheme of ancient history of India that is being worked out by the researches of learned scholars has not yet been conclusively settled in regard to the lay affairs of that remote period which may have witnessed the great war that is reported to have been fought out on the plains of Kurukshetra between the Kauravas and the Pandavas backed by their respective allies. But the time is not far distant when it will be practicable to avoid prejudices and misunderstandings that at present prevent our approaching that great event in the proper spirit. The Puranas are steadily winning the confidence of the most hostile critics, and the actual occurrence of the Great War is coming to be recognized, on the authority of the Puranas, as having taken place at a period which is not very far from 3000 BC. The narration of the Mahabharata may now be seriously accepted as providing a tentative basis for the historical career of Sri Krishna. The Harivamsa, which forms the supplement of the great epic, is not opposed to the Mahabharata either in the spirit or in the so-called assumptions regarding particulars of the career of Sri Krishna that do not appear in the great epic. The difficulty in regard to the Bhagavatam has also become susceptible of historical handling if that great Purana was actually composed in the 9th century AD. As seems not very improbable, it should still be historically possible to accept its testimony regarding even the events of the boyhood of Krishna. But from the lay point of view, this question is not of absorbing interest in as much as the politically important activities in the career of Sri Krishna belong to a later period. But from the point of view of religious history, the story of the marvelous boyhood of Krishna is all important and demands our most careful consideration. The Mahabharata deals exclusively with the doings of Krishna as king of Dwaraka and ruler of the Yadavas, but the mighty deeds of Krishna recorded in the Mahabharata form no part of the worship of Sri Radha Govinda, which is the subject matter of the present work. Bhandarkar, in his anxiety to redeem the worship of Krishna from the charge of immorality, might prefer the worship of the wedded husband of Rukmini to that of Sri Radha Krishna. But the Bhagavatam makes the pastimes of Vrindavana the heart and kernel of the whole narrative of its deeds of Krishna as the divinity, and it is this which supplies all the materials for the prevalent worship of Sri Radha Govinda. The political Krishna occupies but a secondary position, if even that, in the sphere of worship. The narrative of the Bhagavatam, so far as it covers the same ground as the Mahabharata, does not differ materially from the story told by the epic. But the interpretation and point of view of the Bhagavatam is throughout explicitly different from that of the Mahabharata, even in its treatment of those events that are common to the two works. The later date of the appearance of the Bhagavatam, together with the new perspective adopted and the prominence given in it to the boyhood of Krishna, has given rise to the doubts regarding the authenticity of its story of the boyhood of Krishna, which is, however, also found in several other Puranas of an admittedly more ancient date. Sectarian manipulation of history is assumed to be responsible for difference of version in the treatment of even historical events that are connected with the origin and growth of creeds. Theologians are supposed to be often ready to be unmindful of any version that may appear to them to be opposed to the tenets of the creed that they happen to profess. The Bhagavatam, judged by this canon, has appeared to certain scholars as being less reliable, in the considered historical sense, than the great epic. This view is also supposed to cut at the root of the reality of the religion itself. The issue regarding religion may be put thus. Did the pastimes of Krishna at Vrindavana manifest themselves on the mundane plane at any period in the ordinary historical sense? The answer should be, even from the historical point of view, partly, in the affirmative and negative. The Bhagavatam is regarded by the absolutists as being both a work of the medieval period as well as the very body of the eternally existing truth himself. The argument, viz., that as it happens to belong to the medieval period it cannot also at the same time be eternal, that is without any origin, is inapplicable to the Bhagavatam. The case is exactly the same with the Vrindavana pastimes. They are also regarded to be eternally true. They are at the same time claimed to be historically true. But they are not claimed to be merely historical events. They are, therefore, claimed to be as being both old and new, or neither. They are not regarded as limitable by the mundane categories. It, therefore, becomes necessary to widen the scope of the historical method itself in order to treat such a subject with any principle of consistency. The adherence to the scheme of gradual evolution of the creed has to be got rid of. The test of contemporary evidence as proof of authenticity should be found to be even more misleading for this particular purpose than it always is ordinarily. What is the reality of the degree of validity of contemporary evidence in the ascertainment of the truth? I record my opinion regarding a certain phenomenon actually occurring before my very eyes. The statement is made up of the narration of the occurrence and my individual opinion regarding its nature and other particulars that I may suppose have a bearing on it. The narrative portion is separated from opinion by the critics and is accepted in that unexplained form as historically true. If Krishna actually passed his divine boyhood in Vrindavana and performed at that place all the miracles before the very eyes of all the people, the older narrative of the Mahabharata, it is argued, should have also been cognizant of the same. If those miracles had been the most important of all the activities of Krishna, who is the hero of the epic, they could not have been altogether omitted by the writer of the great epic, as they must have been actual and well-known occurrences. Such argument, although legitimate within its due limits in the case of mundane events, does not apply without a good deal of modification to the pastimes of the divinity. It is an option of the servants of Krishna, which they are not loth to exercise, to divulge his activities, or keep them concealed from the knowledge even of contemporaries. Those activities possess the special quality of being recognized as true in the real and not merely historical sense, as soon as, and whenever, they are so divulged to the unerring consciousness of the pure individual soul. On the other hand, the reality is impossible of being ever discovered by the empiric historical method. The Absolute chooses to present his deluding face to the sense perception of man. His deluding energy is all-powerful and is able to prevent the search and discovery of the truth, for whose service, however, every individual soul has an imperative necessity. The tentative categories of the mundane logicians are no other than fetters of the deluding energy that tend to produce the strange belief that the transitory and limited are necessarily also true. It is this undoubted fact that vitiates the current short-sighted historical method at its source. The reality of the ocean is neither proved nor disproved by the admission or denial of the ignorant dweller of the Taklamakan desert. Such admission or such denial is equally abortive and wide of the mark if the observer has no knowledge of his subject. The issue itself as regards the truth does not exist for the pedant of the waterless desert of the narrow and closely barriered hinterland of empiricism. What value, for instance, are we to attach to such historical finding as this, viz., that the teaching of Sri Caitanya was the cause of the political downfall of Orissa? Sri Caitanya teaches that the Absolute is served by all conditions, beings and events, either consciously or unconsciously as regards the agents themselves. The decline as well as the rise of empires and worlds serves equally in their tiny ways the uncompossible Absolute. As soon as their relation of service to the Absolute is grasped by the agents, the real consciousness of the truth is produced in the humble agent. So long as the Absolute continues to be pedantically regarded as a part of physical nature, as cause or effect, there is no consciousness at all even of the issue itself of the real truth. Sri Caitanya and his activities belong to the plane of the Absolute. The empiric historian, with his geographical and chronological apparatus of observation, can have really no proper idea of the grotesque anomaly that he unconsciously perpetrates by his pedantic effort to gauze the Absolute by the standards supplied to her victim by his deluding energy in the form of the mundane categories that can only limit and define, whereas the function that is required to be performed is to get rid of the necessity of having to do either. If Srimad Bhagavatam, which professes to treat of the Absolute, is considered to be an object of this phenomenal world, how can it possibly impart to a person who chooses to entertain such illogical thought any knowledge of its contents? The recipient of the consciousness of the Absolute as well as the communicant of such consciousness must alike belong to the plane of the Absolute consciousness. The empiric consciousness is not in the plane of the Absolute consciousness at all. It can only bungle and commit a deliberate blunder by attempting to limit and define the immeasurable and undefinable under the plea of a necessity that need not be supposed to exist at all. It is possible, if the limitations of the mental equipment are fully remembered and allowed for a person desirous of treating the subject on the plane of the Absolute to write the cautious narrative of the activities of Godhead in the limited vocabulary, without falling wholly into the deliberate blunders of dogmatic empiricism. The revealed scriptures belong to the class of such authentic records regarding the Absolute. They need not be produced at the time of appearance of the events on the mundane plane to be historically acceptable as conveying the direct or first-hand testimony of those occurrences. They are quite independent of the conditions which the mind of the empiric historian finds it impossible to shake off and which make it impossible for him to conceive of the possibility of spiritual occurrences. Therefore, empiric speculations regarding the so-called historicity of a spiritual event instead of establishing its genuineness only serve to display the utter insufficiency of the empirical historical method itself for the purpose of the treatment of the history of the Absolute. For example, the complaint of the empiric scholar that it is not possible to set forth the nature of the development of spiritual life in India for lack of definite chronology, which renders a scientific classification of the original works treating of Indian religion impossible, however plausible in itself it may appear to be at first sight, is, in the light of the foregoing discussion, at once found to be after all only the result of a wholly deluded attitude towards the Absolute himself. As if the development of spiritual life is capable of being measured by the process of so-called mundane evolution based on the chronological sequence of mundane occurrences. Our contention is not that the pastimes of Sri Krishna are historical events but that they are a revelation of the truth in the form of historical events. The pastimes of Sri Krishna are not, therefore, less true than any historical events whatsoever. They are much more. All the historical events of this world will be enabled to disclose the real elements of the truth that they represent only when they would be set forth in their proper relationship to the only eternal verity, viz., the pastimes of Krishna. It is the historical events and the canons of historical judgment that require to be brought into tune with the truth, who is no other than Krishna. But the empiric historian does the exact opposite of this. He assumes the truth of historical events and his canons of historical judgment as the standard to which the pastimes of Krishna are to conform for the realization of any element of the truth that they may contain. The whole difficulty is ultimately due to the muddled way of thinking favored by the empiricists that supposes itself to be self-sufficient for the purpose of finding the truth. It is empiricism that requires to be made properly conscious of its limitations and to be forced into a serious consideration of the nature of the truth whom it professes in and out of season to be so willing to serve. Once the nature of the truth is taken into our serious consideration, the inconclusiveness of the cult of historicity should be perfectly plain to every impartial thinker. Further anxious consideration of the subject should enable the empiric method to be limited to its proper scope and by such limited employment to be enabled to serve the quest of the unlimited. As soon as the mind is directed to the question of the nature of the truth, it is enabled by truth himself to understand the otherwise inexplicable postulations of the spiritual scriptures that it is necessary to obey in order to attain to the plane of the real quest of the truth. Every circumstance even of this world will then be found to be a help in the realization of the truth, and nothing will be found to be a hindrance. The only hindrance, as a matter of fact, is the empiric attitude itself. By the empiric attitude one is led to launch out on the quest of the absolute truth with the resources of admittedly utter ignorance. This foolhardiness must be made to cease. The method of submissive inquiry enjoined by the scripture should be substituted after being properly learnt from those who have themselves attained to the right knowledge of the same by the proper method of submission. It is only after one has actually obtained the vision of the truth, whose face is so completely hid from the sight of the empiric thinker, that one can, under the guidance of the truth himself, set out on the quest of the truth with any chance of finding him and proclaiming him to others. So, although the method that has been employed throughout this narrative may appear to be inconsistent with the demands of the blind empiric judgment, the reader is requested for the very much more weighty reasons set forth above to lend his listening ear to an attempt to apply the methods of the revealed scriptures for the purpose of describing the real nature of Krishna and his pastimes, in pursuance of the mercy of the authorized teachers, on the ground that the method is the only one that claims to be applicable to the subject of the Absolute. As the working knowledge of the nature of Sri Krishna is the starting point of the search of the truth, it is my purpose in this chapter to present the reader with a summary of the traditional account of the real nature of Sri Krishna, which is revealed by the scriptures of all ages and countries in more or less explicit forms. The outline of the history of Sri Krishna as told in the Bhagavatam, which may be accepted as the only authentic account for our purposes, is as follows. At the close of the cycle known as Dwapara, Krishna manifested his appearance in Bharatabarsha. He was born at Mathura. He was the son of Vasudeva. His mother was Devaki, the sister of King Kamsa of the race of the Bhajas. Apprehending harm to himself from the issue of Vasudeva and Devaki, Kamsa, that unworthy scion of the Bhoja, had cast the immaculate couple into the royal prison, which was most closely guarded. As they passed their days inside the prison of Kamsa, 6 sons were born in succession to Vasudeva and Devaki. All of them were killed in their infancy by the cruel and fearful Kamsa. Sri Balarama was born as their 7th issue. He was transferred to the keeping of Rohini in Bra as foster mother, the report being circulated that there had been miscarriage at childbirth. Godhead himself was the 8th issue of Vasudeva and Devaki. He was conveyed by Vasudeva to the home of Nanda in Bra, whose wife Yasoda had just then given birth to a daughter. Sri Krishna was left to the care of Nanda and Yasoda in Bra, and their daughter was brought to Kamsa's prison and exhibited as the 8th issue of Devaki. Meanwhile, Sri Krishna was growing up in Bra in the company of his brother, Rama. Putana, an adept in slaughtering infants, was deputed by Kamsa to kill Krishna under the pretense of giving him suck by the profession of motherly affection. Putana was killed by the halo of the power of the infant Krishna. The casuistical demon Trinavarta was slain. The cart for conveyance of their baggages, under which Krishna had been put to bed by his parents, was smashed by the kicks of the divine infant. He showed his mother, by opening his mouth, that the whole world was accommodated therein. He made her see that nescience served to foster love for the power of the truth. The infant displayed much juvenile ignorance that was promotive of love for himself, the true cognition. Noting the waywardness of her child, the matronly milkmaid, embodying the most exquisite degree of serving zeal, thought of binding Krishna by means of hempen cords. But in vain. But the incompossible at last submitted to be bound by the exclusive love of the affectionate mistress of Nanda's home. Krishna broke the twin Arjuna trees in course of his childish sports, releasing the sons of a god who had been reduced to that pitiable condition. Even the gods are liable to lapse into the senseless condition of trees by addiction to evil deeds, and even trees are enabled to regain the spiritual condition by the influence of accidental association with the pure-hearted. Krishna goes into the forest with his chums for pasturing the calves. There he slays the demon Batsasur, who represents the offenses of boyhood. It is now that religious hypocrisy in the form of Bakasur, brought up by Kamsa, is also killed by Krishna of pure understanding. Aghasur also is slain. He is the embodiment of the principle of cruelty. Thereupon Krishna dined out in the open on the banks of the Yamuna in the company of his chums. The four-faced Brahma stole the calves and the cowboys. The orderer of the phenomenal world was thereupon deluded by the power of Krishna. By this episode, the complete supremacy of the immaculate sweetness of Sri Krishna over every other principle was demonstrated. Krishna, the beloved of the realm of the perfect cognition, is not subject to any regulative restrictions. This also was established. The opulence of Krishna suffers no curtailment even by the total destruction of all spiritual and non-spiritual realms. No one is able to set bounds to the incompossible ocean of the power of Krishna. The evil-minded Danyakasura, the ass of blunt judgment, was destroyed by Baladeva, the principle of the pure individual soul. The serpent Kalya, the self of crookedness and malice, polluted the waters of the Yamuna, the mellow liquid of the spiritual principle. This wicked demon was thereupon slain by Hari. When the wild forest fire, the evil of internal faction within the community, burst forth in all its destructive fury, Sri Krishna in person swallowed it up. Thus the Lord is ever solicitous of the well-being of Brahma. Then Rama killed the demon Pralamba, the thief in disguise who was sent by Kamsa for stealing the children. And when the sky began to be surcharged with the love-laden clouds heralding the advent of the showery season, the milkmaids of Braha, who are loved by Krishna and are by their nature of a loving disposition, felt intoxicated by singing the praises of Krishna. They were deeply stirred by the strains of Krishna's flute. They now worshipped Yogamaya, who effects the union of the individual soul with Krishna, with the desire of gaining Krishna as their lover. Those who are possessed of a strong desire to serve Krishna find that there is no adjustment regarding themselves or their relation with others that is necessary for the purpose of which they need feel ashamed. They are no longer disposed to conceal their minds. Krishna stole away the clothes of those milkmaids at their bath to disclose the perfectly nude state which is the immaculate sporting ground of divine love. Sri Krishna, feeling hungry, begged for food that had been prepared for offering at the sacrificial ceremony by the ritualistic brahmanas. But they did not give it to him in the pride of their superior status. Those sacrificial brahmanas were addicted to a variety of empirical interpretations of the scriptures inspired by the desire of attainment of worldly prosperity or by love for barren speculation which ends in the negation of all specific forms of activity. By dint of their traditional attachment to the scriptures and the bygone ancestors, they are apt to degenerate into the mere mechanical transmitters of the rules and taboos that are found in the scriptures. By reason of this vain attitude, they are disabled to understand that the attainment of love for Godhead is the only purpose of all those rules and regulations. How can people with such mentality be induced to serve Krishna? But the loyal wives of those sacrificial brahmanas, despite the opposition of their husbands, repaired to Sri Krishna in the forest and surrendered themselves to the feet of the Supreme Soul. This demonstrates the truth that neither intellectual nor hereditary equipments are the cause of love for Krishna. It also lays down the right principle of conduct of conditioned souls as consisting in regarding everything with an equal eye. The Varna and Ashrama institutions of man are intended for the regulation of the society of this world. If the social order is preserved, it affords scope for association with pure-hearted persons and thereby offers opportunities for discussions regarding the supreme desideratum. These tend to spiritual progress. It is the possibility of attainment of love of Krishna by their means that constitutes the value of the institutions of Varna and Ashrama, the system of divinely ordained division of social functions and grades. There can, therefore, be no disloyalty to the purpose of the social arrangement if one gives up the observance of the social rules for the sake of Krishna himself. As a matter of fact, on the actual attainment of the goal itself, the further pursuit of the means of its attainment becomes unnecessary for all persons who are really desirous of obtaining the goal. It is also no infringement of the purpose of the social code to allow such a person full scope for serving Krishna. In enforcing social obligations, it is, therefore, necessary to consider the actual condition of individuals to whom they are to apply. Otherwise, the very object of social organization itself will be wholly frustrated. Hari then forbade the people to perform the sacrifice to Indra. The people were wont to sacrifice to Indra to please him in order that he might send them rain which was necessary for the sustenance of themselves and their flocks. This represents the principle of utilitarian work on the basis of mutual cooperation for the safety and well-being of society. Indra, being denied his offerings, in anger tried to punish the denizens of Braha by sending down torrential rain which flooded the fields and homesteads of the people. Hari himself protected the residents of Gokula from this peril. No harm can come to the servants of Krishna if for the purpose of serving him even their ordinary domestic and social duties have to be given up altogether, which may result in the destruction of the world. No one can kill whom Krishna himself protects. Even the cosmic law is not binding on them. The devotees of Krishna are free from all observance of all law except that of spiritual love for the Supreme Lord. Through the realm of faith there flows the perennial stream of the holy Yamuna. The transcendental river is the liquid essence of the pure cognitive state. Nanda was in danger of being drowned in the waters of that river of joy, but was mercifully rescued by his son's blissful activity. Thereafter Sri Krishna showed the cowherds his own divine majesty in the realm of the Absolute. The divine majesty is always latent in the personality of Krishna. The Supreme Lord, who is the beloved of the eternally free souls and their following, then performed the pastime of the dance in the circle of his beloved. This pastime manifests the principle of working of divine love. Lord Hari, out of his mercy, danced in the rasa circle formed by the milkmaids. He promoted the growth of their highest love by separation, by his subsequent disappearance. The stellar system may supply a poor analogy of the rasa pastime. Just as the sun surrounded by their respective circling groups of satellites dance round the polar star in the form of a circle, in the same manner, all individual souls eternally enact their harmonious dance in their orbits round Sri Krishna as the center of the system, sustained therein by the force of Sri Krishna's overpowering attraction for all spiritual entities. In this vast round of the rasa dance, Sri Krishna is the only male and all individual souls are females. In the realm of the Absolute, Sri Krishna is the sole master and enjoyer. All the rest belong to the category of servants and objects of enjoyment that minister to his sole pleasure. The rasa pastime is capable of being analogically described in the vocabulary at our command only in terms of the sexual relationship. The reason of this is that there is a real correspondence between the two, the sexual relationship of this world being the unwholesome reflection of the spiritual process in the mirror of this material world. The analogy is, however, bound to prove misleading if due allowance is not made for the radical difference between the substantive nature and location of the two processes. The principle of mundanum resting on that of physical sex can never be divested of its innate grossness and unwholesomeness. The grossness of worldly enjoyment as well as the sensuousness and frailties of both the object and subject of the sexual passion are responsible for the imperfections of mundanum. The rasa pastime is absolutely free from any touch of unwholesomeness, all the conditions being favorable for the promotion of the most perfect bliss by universal association in the rites of the most exquisite love. No apprehension of lewdness or sexuality must, therefore, be allowed to stand in the way of the exhaustive consideration of this highest and all-important spiritual subject. The circular amorous dance or the rasa pastime expresses the manifestation of divine love in its perfectly unobscured form. The highest realization of this process consists in this, that in its Srimati Radhika, the highest object of all reverence of all souls being that supreme blissful power of Krishna who expresses his specifically luscious quality, appears in person in the circle of the dancers, in all her most exquisite charm encompassed by the bhavas, her suite of the most confidential female friends. At the close of the pastime of the circular dance there follows naturally sporting in the liquid current of the Yamuna, the cognitive essence itself dissolving into liquid bliss on the full manifestation of love. Nanda, who is the personality of spiritual bliss, is swallowed up by the boa constrictor of the joy of the liberation of merging in the divine essence. Krishna, the protector of his devotee, thereupon rescues him from his peril. The stubborn demon Sankhachura, who sets fame over every other principle, is then slain in an attempt to create disturbance in Braya. Kashi, the demon of the vanity of political ambition, is next slain by Krishna, the foe of Kamsa, when the Lord finally made up his mind to return to Mathura. Akrura, the contriver of all occurrences, then conducted Hari to Mathura. On his arrival there, the Lord killed the sturdy wrestlers and then also slew Kamsa himself with his younger brother. On the departure from this world of Athisam in the person of Kamsa, Sri Krishna bestowed the charge of the earth on Kamsa's progenitor, Ugrasena, who embodies the principle of independence. The twin widows of Kamsa thereupon repaired to their parent, the king of Magadha, the embodiment of elevationism, and submitted to him their sorrows of the state of widowhood. On receiving this tiding, the king of Magadha set out at the head of his armies and fought 17 mighty battles about the city of Mathura, but was every time defeated by Hari. When Jarasandha at last beleaguered Mathura for the 18th time, Krishna retired to his own capital of Dwarakapuri. The real significance of this episode consists in this, that the potency of the principle of elevationism is constituted of the 18 categories of the 10 personal lustrations from birth to death, the fourfold classification according to aptitude and the fourfold division into stages of the individual life, Varnashrama. When the seat of knowledge is finally captured by these 18 categories by fostering renunciation of the world, there is manifested the disappearance of Godhead on the consequent emergence of the longing for pseudo-liberation. While Krishna abode in Mathura, he placed himself under the charge of the teacher of religion, and after completing his study of all the Shastras, restored the life of his preceptor's dead son. There is no necessity in the case of Krishna, who is naturally perfect, to endeavor for the acquisition of knowledge. The episode indicates that the intellect of man makes progress in erudition during its stage of residence at Mathura, which is the academy of all learning. Those who covet the fruits of their activities also cherish attachment to Krishna. Their attachment to the Lord is charged with impurity. The attachment by degrees grows into the well-purified unadulterated liking for Krishna. This salutary truth is manifested in the case of Kubja's love for Krishna during his sojourn in Mathura. Uddhava went to Gokula to be acquainted fully with the loving state of Brahma, which is superior to all forms of devotion. The Shrutis affirm that the Pandavas represent the branch of righteousness, while the Kauravas are the offshoots of unrighteous conduct. For this reason, Sri Krishna is verily the friend and preserver of the family of the Pandavas. In order to establish the well-being of righteousness and for the deliverance of sinners, the Lord deputed Akrura to Hastina as his messenger. Jarasandha, the champion of an wholesome fruitive activity, beleaguered the beautiful city of Mathura, the abode of the knowledge of the undifferentiated greatness and nourishing quality of the divinity, Brahman. Here the point that is established is that fruitive activity itself is of two kinds. One variety is directed to the supreme Desidratum itself. By such activities there is growth of knowledge, and by their conjunction liking for Godhead is developed. This conjunction of activity, knowledge and the principle of divine service is also variously designated as the process of karma, jnana or bhakti. Those who possess real insight call it the method of harmony. But there is a different variety of activity which is directed to a selfish purpose. This form is known as karma kanda, to distinguish it from the process of what is termed karma yoga. This selfish variety of fruitive activity often gives rise to apprehension regarding the existence and attainment of Godhead and promotes their union with Atheism by wedding them with the latter. It is this unwholesome variety of worldly activity that in the person of Jarasandha invaded the city of Mathura. Thereupon, Sri Krishna, of his own accord, conducted his friends, viz., the community of his devotees, to the city of Dwaraka. This is the process of the service of Godhead under the regulative principles of the divine dispensation. The Yavana king belonged to a society that was not regulated by the divinely ordained principle of class and stage, varnashrama. Being thus addicted to ignorant utilitarian activity and relying on the resources of such activity, and being thereby opposed also to the path of liberation by empiric knowledge, the Yavana king scornfully kicked King Muchukunda, representing aptitude for the path of liberation. The Yavana king was thereupon destroyed by the superior power of King Muchukunda. Hari then repaired to Dwaraka, the seat of the knowledge of the divinity in all his majesty. There the Lord wedded Rukmini Devi, embodiment of the supreme majesty of Godhead. Pradyumna, god of love, was no sooner born from the womb of Rukmini than he was stolen away by Sambara, embodiment of the deluding energy. The body of the god of love had formerly been burnt up by Mahadeva, representing barren asceticism. At that period Rati Devi, consort of Kama, god of love, had sought refuge in the demoniac propensity for the lust of the flesh. Kamadeva of great prowess, being now instructed by his consort Ratidevi, killed Sambara representing the pleasures of the flesh and made his way to Dwaraka. By way of restoration of the gem, Hari now wedded the auspicious Satyabhama, who is part and parcel of Sri Radhika, the fullness of the quality of extreme loving sensitiveness. Rukmini, with 7 other ladies, were the reflections of the power of the most delicious and the very highest divine love, appearing in the conditions of splendor and majesty. They became the chief queens of the royal home of Krishna at Dwaraka. At Dwaraka Sri Krishna's offspring and relations multiplied apace. This points to an essential difference that distinguishes reverential worship rendered to the majesty of Godhead from that of loving devotion. The former naturally tends to expand by the process of division. The latter is indivisible. It is not possible to deal with this matter in greater detail at this place, but the subject requires to be most carefully treated in a separate treatise. A certain demon proclaiming himself to be Vasudeva preached the doctrine of undifferentiated monism at Kashi, the abode of Hera. The Lord of Roma, who is Godhead himself, after slaying that demon, burnt Kashidam, the seat of that corrupt opinion. The Lord seated on the back of Gruda slew the demon Bama, who was filled with the notion that the things of this material universe are Godhead. This is idolatry. The worship of the holy divine Archa is not to be confounded with the worship of idols. The latter consists of the 2 coordinated varieties of pseudo-worship of nature in its positive and negative aspects. Godhead rescued the victims of idolatry by destroying the faith in the undifferentiated Brahman, which is the subtle and more dangerous one of the 2 forms of idolatry, and by accepting the worship of their quantum victims. By killing Jarasandha by the agency of Bhima, the Lord rescued many a king from the bondage of elevationism, worship of pure worldly utility. He accepted unrestricted worship at the sacrifice of Yudhishthira and cut off the head of Shishupala, who was a personal enemy of himself. At the Battle of Kurukshetra, Krishna afforded relief to the earth groaning under her burden and, having re-established the pure religion, saved spiritual society. On his arrival at Dwaraka, the sage Narada was filled with great wonder on beholding the Lord appearing at one and the same time in the homes of all his different consorts. The fact that Godhead is fully present everywhere and in every soul is much more wonderful than that he is one and pervades the whole universe by his divine essence. The demon Dantavakra, embodiment of barbarism, was slain. The Lord bestowed on Arjuna, his brother by the religion bond, the hand of his own sister Subhadra in marriage. The Lord saved the city of Dwaraka by destroying the efforts of Salva backed by the knowledge of the deceptive physical sciences. The beautiful products of material sciences are nothing in comparison with the doings of the Lord. King Riga was undergoing the punishment of unrighteous conduct in the form of a reptile. He was delivered from the condition of a reptile by the mercy of the Lord. Hari ate the raw rice given him by the Brahmana Sudama, out of love. The Lord is not so pleased with the offering of even sweatmeats that are made by the Pashhandas, unbelievers. The monkey Dabita representing UN godly carnival was killed by Baladeva embodying the essence of the pure soul full of the love of Krishna. Baladeva performed the pastime of love in the company of milkmaids who were the different substantive aspects of the pure soul, in a great forest in which there was a city made of the cognitive principle of the pure soul. These divine pastimes are enacted in the hearts of the devotees. They disappear with the termination of the earthly sojourn of the devotees, just as the show ceases on the actor leaving the stage. The will of Krishna, in the form of time, having made the Yadavas, pure spiritual states, desist from their pastimes, overwhelmed the divine abode of Dwaraka by the waves of the ocean of oblivion. The self-same will of Krishna, who is the source of ceaseless joy, made the devotees give up their bodies, worn out by decay, and by fomenting mutual discord, at Prabhas, representing the knowledge of the divinity. The aptitude towards Krishna that dwells in the hearts of the devotees attains to its pristine glory by its conjunction with the pure soul on his severance from the physical body. It continues its full manifestation in Goloka, which is the highest portion of the realm of Vaikuntha. These activities of Sri Krishna never cease in Goloka, which is the innermost sphere of the realm of the Absolute and the abode of the Supreme Lord in the manifest unobstructed enjoyment of his own pure nature. They are available to the conditioned soul in terms of the categories of time, space, and agent, in proportion to the realization of his proper spiritual nature. This realization may remain confined to the detached relationship of the individual soul to the Lord or expand into the form of a social function. It is this latter form that made its appearance in the pure consciousness of Narada and Vyasa in the cycle of the Dvapara age. The spiritual consciousness is, therefore, susceptible of manifesting its appearance in terms of the activities of individuals and also of those of the community of pure souls. With the growth of the social instinct, the second form of manifestation makes its appearance in due course. Regarded from the point of view of the associated spiritual consciousness, Hari is realized as fully manifest in Mathura, more fully in Dwaraka, and most fully of all in Braha. The degree of purity of its blissfulness is the measure of the plenitude of the divine manifestation. Judged by this standard, the joyous activities of Braha form the highest platform of the spiritual realization of the individual soul. In this most blissful experience, Krishna is ultimately realizable as the sweetheart of the spiritual milkmaids, the very highest point in the process being the blissful activities of Krishna as the beloved consort of Sri Radhika. Those who have been enabled to taste the sweetness of these spiritual realizations are fully established in the eternal function of the pure soul. It is not possible to elaborate the quality of the liquid sweetness of the process by means of general terms. It is for this reason that the poetic sages have expounded the truth of the activities of Krishna by their detailed concrete descriptions. The supreme bliss is obtainable only by the most solicitous service of Krishna. It is not possible to attain real and abiding satisfaction by the contemplation of Godhead as the regulator and companion of the individual soul, or by the realization of the greatness of the undifferentiated divinity by the process of empiric knowledge, or by worshipping Godhead by the method of the sacrifice, yajna, as the giver of the fruits of utilitarian activities, i.e., the highest worship of Sri Krishna. The method of the worship of Krishna at Braha is the highest of all forms of worship. The worships that are practiced at Mathura and Dwaraka, respectively, owe their value in augmenting the exquisiteness of the pastimes of Braha. It is our purpose, therefore, to consider the worship of Braha in some detail at this place. The discussion of the worship of Braha should not be withheld from the cognizance of the conditioned souls, as by means of this alone they can be really benefited. It is only when the conditioned soul is in the position to realize the nature of the mode of worship at Bra that he is freed from the fear of death by obtaining the life eternal. The subject of the worship of Bra may be conveniently considered by the related methods of synthetic or positive and analytic or negative treatment. Synthetically regarded, the worship resolves itself into a system of relationships divisible in their turn into 5 distinct grades. These grades are called respectively the tranquilized state, condition of a servant, that of a friend, that of parents, and finally that of consorts, in the order of increasing excellence from the point of view of the detached observer. In Bra, certain denizens always regard themselves as the servants of the Prince of Bra. Others consider themselves as his fortunate friends. Sridama, Sabala, etc. possess the pure friendly disposition. Yasoda, Rohini, Nanda are actuated by undiluted parental affection. The consorts, with Sri Radhika at their head, regard themselves exclusively as the promoters of Krishna's amorous love in the dancing circle. Nowhere else except in Brindabana can there exist these dispositions of pure exclusive relationships with Krishna. It is for this reason that pure souls feel an instinctive attraction for the charming Brindabana. In Brindabana the scriptures agree in declaring the amorous disposition to be the highest of all. By the principle that Godhead happens to be the sole enjoyer of every entity, the individual soul is proved to be eternally ministrant to the pleasure of Sri Krishna. In Bra, however, there exist no dividing limitations as between Krishna and the serving individual souls like those that separate the master from the servant in this world. On the contrary, there always prevails indivisible supreme bliss in the visible form of these all-loving relationships. The consideration of loving separation also finds a place there for the sole purpose of augmenting still further the happiness of loving union. This blissful disposition, which belongs only to Bra, is realized in its gradual development by the careful preliminary service of relationships that obtain outside Bra in Mathura and Dwaraka. The conditioned soul is eligible for service of Godhead only under the strictest regulations. At a subsequent stage, on the appearance of attachment for Krishna, the disposition of Bra gradually manifests itself. At this latter stage Krishna is served internally with loving devotion, but outward regard is displayed towards the regulative social institutions. This duplicity of disposition and practice is known as parakya, relationship as to a paramour. Because the condition of the devotee resembles that of the wedded wife who may have unfortunately contracted a passion which is not to be indulged for a person other than her lawful husband. In these circumstances, the really loyal wife is under the painful necessity, from an innate sense of duty, of showing all outward regard that is due to her husband and of observing scrupulously the domestic and social regulations, although she can no longer feel for them any real internal attachment. The apparently unintelligible and insincere attachment to society of the highest class of devotees cannot avoid being misunderstood by those comparatively advanced pupils who are in a position to appreciate the beneficent nature of the scriptural regulations for the promotion of the spiritual well-being of society. But the highest class of devotees do not modify their method out of deference to adverse criticisms even of such bona fide objectors. Those novices who are not well advanced on the spiritual path are still less able to understand the ways of loving devotion which actuate the best devotees. There is a regular gradation in the growing manifestation of the pure spontaneous attachment for Krishna. The growth of such attachment is capable of being divided into 3 distinct stages in order of increasing excellence, viz. 1. The love of conditioned souls adulterated by endeavor to follow the scriptural regulations. 2. Love for Krishna on the absolute plane but wanting in the quality of intimacy. And finally, 3. Perfect love for Krishna free from all extraneous dross. The limit of pure love for Krishna in Sri Radhika, the counterwhole of Sri Krishna himself, is termed Mahabhava, the loving condition major. Different fro, and the specific nature of Mahabhava but closely approximating the same, there is found the eightfold assemblage of the bhavas inhering in the pure individual souls. They are the 8 sakhis, the charami, of Sri Radhika. The bhavas of worshippers adjoining those of the sakhis are the manjaris, spray. The worshipper should in the first instance seek the protection of the manjari whose bhava corresponds to the worshipper's own nature. He is, thereafter, to offer his submission to the sakhi who is served by the manjari. If he obtains the mercy of the Sakhi he will be enabled thereby to attain to the refuge of the feet of Sri Radhika. In the circle of the great Rasidance the worshippers, Manjari, Sakhi and Srimati Radhika, occupy positions that are very much analogous to those of the satellite, planet, the sun and the polar star respectively in the mundane stellar system. In the process of augmentation of bhava, the promotion of the enjoyment of Krishna becomes available for jivas who have attained to the quality of mahabhava. There are 18 obstacles in the way of this exquisite consummation of bhava which belongs to Brahma. These are apt to pollute pure love and give rise to offense. It is imperatively necessary to consider the nature of these obstacles by way of the negative treatment of Brahma, which should supplement and help to prevent any grave misconception of the positive exposition. The first obstacle is one's encounter with the pseudo-guru. The bad guru is no other than the demoness Putana who offers the suck of her poisoned breast for killing newborn Krishna in the purified cognition of the soul. Worshippers who have already obtained admission to the path of loving devotion should ponder on the appearance of Putana in Brahma and be thereby enabled to remove the initial obstacle, viz., the bad spiritual guide. The guru is either the inner or outwardly manifested spiritual guide. The soul in the state of perfect concentration in the absolute samadhi is the guru of the soul. In other words, a person who places himself under the guidance of the reasoning faculty and learns from it the method of worship, thereby gives the direction of himself to the pseudo-guru. The dallyings of the empiric assertive rational faculty with the eternal religion by the offer of her support for its furtherance are comparable to the artifices of Putana. Worshippers on the path of loving spiritual devotion owe it to themselves to discard all assertive help of reasoning in the attempt to realize the nature of the summum bonum, and seek instead the exclusive guidance of spiritual concentration. The human being from whom one learns about the substantive nature of worship of Godhead is the outwardly manifested guru. The bona fide guru is the person who, after realizing the true nature of the endeavor of loving devotion, instructs the submissive disciple, Sishya, regarding the summum bonum, taking into due consideration the specific requirement of the latter. One who presumes to instruct others without himself realizing the nature of the course of loving devotion, or who, although himself cognizant of the nature of the path of devotion, instructs the disciple regarding the same without due consideration of the aptitude of the latter, is the pseudo-guru. It is necessary by all means to renounce the guidance of such a guru. The second obstacle on the path of loving devotion, in the order of appearance, is wrong speculative controversy. In Brahma, i.e., on the path of spontaneous love, it is difficult for the proper spiritual state to appear until the demon Trinavarta, embodiment of disloyal controversy, has been killed outright. All philosophical speculation, all skeptical arguments of the pseudo-Buddhists and empiric rationalists are obstructive of the growth of the disposition of Brahma in the manner of the demon Trinavarta. The third obstacle is represented by the laden cart. The injunctions of the scriptures are apt to be followed in their literal sense without due regard to their meaning. This carrying of the lumber of scriptural learning tends to smother the infant Krishna and requires to be smashed with his help at the very outset if the object of the novice be to realize the state of natural love for Krishna. The mechanical pedant has no access to Brahma. The victims of the pseudo-guru are liable to fall into this plight by being prematurely initiated into the process of the state of a female confidant engaged in service as of the manjari. Such victims do not realize their misfortune by reason of their mechanical aptitude, which is exploited by the pseudo-guru to their utter ruin. Those who follow the advice of such a guru in their worship quickly fall away from the path of devotion. The amorous mood in such cases can never attain to the depth of the truly spiritual process. But this is never realizable by the parties themselves. The fourth obstacle on the path is termed juvenile offense. Persons who are indifferent to the spiritual guide are thereby rendered subject to the inconsistencies and frailties that beset naughty children. This enemy of the infant Krishna is known as Vatsasura. The novice must beware of the guiles of this malicious demon and try to get rid of him at an early stage. The fifth obstacle makes its appearance on the path of the theists, Vaishnavas, in the form of the demon Baka. He is an exceedingly cunning fellow embodying the principle of religious hypocrisy. It is this obstacle which is meant by the offense against the holy name. Those who, falling into the clutches of the pseudo-guru by neglect of the proper exercise of their judgment, deceive themselves by consenting to adopt the higher grade of worship to which they are not entitled, fall under the category of the third class of offenders described above. But those who, even after becoming aware of their unfitness, persist in practicing the higher method of worship, hoping thereby to gain honor and wealth for themselves, commit the offense of religious hypocrisy. Until this defect is discarded, there can be no appearance of the principle of spontaneous liking for Krishna. These hypocrites only deceive the world by the display of the external insignia of sectarianism and pseudo-renunciation. Those persons who choose to show their regard for these arrogant persons in consideration of the external marks exhibited by them, failing to attain the favor of Krishna, only prove to be thorns in the sides of the people of this world. But it should also be borne in mind in this connection that one should be careful not to allow his caution in regard to the abuse of external signs to betray him into maligning a person wearing the respective external marks of the theistic communities, whose conduct may also embody the inner significance of those symbols. It is, therefore, the constant duty of the Vaishnavas, by being neutral as regards external marks, to seek for indications of inner love for Godhead and to associate with and serve the sadhus whom they may be fortunate enough to recognize by this test. The sixth obstacle has the forms of cruelty and violence. This is the demon Aghasura. It is possible for love to suffer gradual decay by the absence of kindness for all animate beings. This must be so inasmuch as kindness can never be a different principle from love for Krishna. There is no substantive difference between love for Krishna and kindness to individual souls. The seventh obstacle assumes the form of infatuation in the shape of an apparently zealous study of the Vedas, scholasticism. Excessive and exclusive attention to the propositions of the diverse polemical schools and their conclusions and modes of argument tend to lessen the poignancy and clearness of the vision of the truths obtained in the exclusive mood. Even Brahma himself doubted the truth of the real nature of Krishna by reason of such infatuation. The eighth obstacle is offered by the demon Danyakasura in the form of the ass, who tries to prevent the palm fruits, which he is himself unable to taste, from being enjoyed by others. The principles of Vaishnavism require for their due appreciation the most penetrating judgment. Persons possessed of a blunted understanding are exposed to this grave plight. The Vaishnava religion is indivisible. There is no scope in it for sectarian narrowness. It is the blunt-headed fool who is liable to misconceive the true nature of the Vaishnava community by supposing it to be a sect distinct from other sects of this world. As a matter of fact, thick-headed persons are themselves unable to understand the teaching of the spiritual works that have been penned by the former Acharyas of the community, and they are also apt to actively prevent others from having access to those works. This is especially the case with those devotees possessed of a stunted judgment who, being mechanically addicted to the regulations, have no inclination to strive for the attainment of the real status. But the Vaishnava religion holds within itself the prospect of infinite progressive advance. Those muddy-headed persons, who choose to remain confined within the literal meaning of the narrow limits of the scriptural regulations, being thereby led to neglect the unconventional path of spontaneous love for Godhead, soon become indistinguishable from persons who are wedded to the cult of fruitive mundane activities. It is therefore never possible to make any progress in the Vaishnava religion till Danyakasura in the form of the ass has been killed. The ninth obstacle is offered by the conduct of those weak-minded persons who take to the unconventional method of service for the purpose of gratifying their senses, which it is not possible to do under the method of regulated service. This is the conduct of the demon Brishabhasura. These persons will be killed by the burning quality of Krishna's personality. The example of such offensive conduct is by no means rare among those hypocrites who make a parade of their religiosity. The 10th obstacle is offered by the cunning serpent Kalya, representing implacable brutality and treachery, who is apt to pour his deadly poison into the melted souls of the Vaishnavas, represented by the liquid current of the Yamuna. The danger threatened by this fatal poison can be got rid of by the grace of Krishna. The 11th obstacle has the form of intracommunal discord. It is comparable to the wild forest fire. The disposition bred by narrow sectarianism, rendering its victim unable to recognize as Vaishnava one who does not assume the external marks of the theistic community, multiplies the obstacles on the path of attainment of the bona fide guru and the actual companionship of the true devotees. It is, therefore, obligatory on all persons to destroy the forest fire by all means. The 12th obstacle on the path of loving devotion is offered by the demon Pralambasura, who is prone to commit theft against one's own self. The danger is represented specifically by the theory of the Brahman of the Mayavadins, who advocate merging in the Brahman as the summum bonum and declare the self-realized condition to be one that is absolutely devoid of any distinguishable feature. The system is characterized by the defect of utter absence of the principle of bliss either for the individual soul or for the Brahman, who is imagined to be perfectly unconcerned about anything. Persistent reflection on those lines gives rise to doubt regarding the very existence of the Brahman and produces conviction in the non-existence of the individual soul and the elaborate concoction of a new science to account for the glaring discrepancies of the Acharyas and proving the utter futility of all human thought and activity. This mode of thinking sometimes finds its way among the Vaishnavas and creates a good deal of trouble in the form of an advocacy of self-destruction. The 13th obstacle takes the form of the worship of Indra and other lesser devatas in the hope of gaining worldly advantages. This prevents the growth of love for Godhead and requires to be avoided with great care. The offenses of theft of another's property and telling of lies are the 14th obstacle. These are represented by the demon Bhaurasura. They stand in the way of one's attaining to perfect love for Krishna and give a good deal of trouble to the novice. The 15th obstacle arises from addiction to intoxicants. In Brahma, the bliss that is experienced by the individual soul on his being freed from the troubles of mind and body is termed Nanda. There are found persons who take to the use of intoxicants supposing such habit to be promotive of the above form of bliss. This quickly causes the serious drawback of self-forgetfulness. This predicament is represented by Nanda's sojourn to the abode of Vruna. This grave offense must be avoided by all means. Those persons who have attained the mode of loving devotion of Brahma must, on no account, use any form of intoxicant. The 16th obstacle has the form of a proneness to acquisition of fame and honor, and desire for sensuous enjoyment, under the plea of devotion. This is the demon Shanhachuda. Those persons who covet fame as the goal of their activities commit thereby the offense of arrogance. It is necessary for Vaishnavas to be very careful about this matter. The next obstacle is offered by the growing sense of blissfulness that tends to increase by the cultivation of the habit of worship till it assumes the form of self-suppression approximating the state of merging with the object of worship. This mood for merging with the divinity is a species of serpent that swallows up Nanda. The novice should endeavor to be a bona fide servant of Godhead by carefully avoiding this fatal temptation. The 18th obstacle is the demon Keshi, who has the form of the horse. As the quality of devotion of the novice undergoes swift development, the sense of one's own superiority makes its appearance. If the novice gives a free scope to the speculation regarding his own excellence, it is apt to lead him into the dire offense of disrespect for the divinity, causing his fall. It is, therefore, necessary that such wicked sentiment may never arise in the heart of the Vaishnava. Even after devotion has been fully developed, the quality of sincere humility should never be absent from the conduct of the Vaishnava. As the contrary of this tends to happen, it becomes necessary for Krishna to kill the demon Keshi. Those who are in the intellectual condition are required to free themselves from those offenses which are to be found in the sphere of Mathura. Those who have a taste for fruitive activity must be on their guard against the offenses that are noticeable at Dwaraka. The devotees should dive completely into love for Sri Krishna by avoiding all those obstacles, as they are apt to breed trouble in Brahma. The eternal truth has been made manifest to this world by Sri Vyasadeva in his narrative of the pastimes of Brahma. But the real nature of the truth cannot be realized by means of knowledge born of the senses. The knowledge is spontaneously experienced by the pure essence of the individual soul in his exclusive state, samadhi. There are, however, pseudo-exclusive states which must not be confounded with the spiritual condition proper, in which there is no presence of any mundane element. In this state the truth becomes self-manifest by the operation of the spiritual potency of divinity. This phenomenal world is the distorted and wholesome reflection of the transcendental realm. It is for this reason that there is a correspondence between the phenomena of this world and the events of the spiritual plane. The substantive reality, in the forms of the name, form, quality, pastimes and the distinctive personality of his paraphernalia, make their appearance to the soul in his exclusive state, samadhi. It is necessary to keep all doubting speculations at their proper distance if the clear vision is to be maintained intact. The least intrusion of such disturbing element blurs and obliterates the spiritual perception. On the gradual subsidence of mundane predilections, the transcendental truth makes his appearance by corresponding stages, finally attaining his full concrete manifestation in the pastimes of Sri Krishna and Sri Brindabana. If the elimination of sensuous speculation is not attended to with scrupulous care, the progress is towards abstraction and absence of distinctive features in such realization. If it be our good fortune to attain to the sight of Brindabana, which is full of every object of beauty, we would be in a position, with the fullest assurance of the truth of our realization, to describe, by means of the admittedly imperfect instrument of mundane vocabulary that we happen to possess for the purpose, the most wonderful and blissful form of Sri Krishna and Sri Brindabana. Such description should not be supposed to be derived from our experience of this world. It is the outcome of direct perception of the substantial reality, of whom the rational phenomena of this world are the distorted and wholesome shadow. No realization of the substance can be reached by the logical manipulation of confused speculation regarding his shadow, whose only function is to mislead to perfection. The beauty of Sri Krishna, described by those who have been fortunate enough to realize the vision, is narrated below for the information of the reader. But the meaning of the description cannot be grasped except in the perfect exclusive state, which is wholly free from any speculative activity born of the mind. The figure of Godhead, fulfilling all requirements of the spiritual principle, is like that of man. His beauty seems to be represented by the reflected correspondence of the inexpressibly cooling, soft, yellowish blue that is noticeable in the gem known as Indranilamani of this world, or is like unto the impression of the first appearance of the rain-bearing clouds at the close of the season of protracted drought. A certain combination of the triple potency representing respectively the principles of existence, consciousness and bliss appears to be disposed in an indivisibly oblique manner about the beauty of divinity. His twin eyes, focusing all the supremely jubilant brightness of the realm of perfect living consciousness, set forth the beauty of his incomparable figure. In the material world those eyes may be found reflected in the beauty of the fresh-blown lotus. On the head of Godhead's own divine form, there is observed a certain distinctive feature similar to which there is to be found nothing at all in all our previous experience. All that can be said is that the tail of the peacock is probably the reflection in this world of this inexpressible peculiarity. A certain garland of flowers that have the easy perfection of the soul sets forth the beauty of the incomparable neck of Sri Krishna. The beauty of the natural flowers of the forest seems to be a reflection of this particular feature. The waist of Sri Krishna is encompassed by knowledge that is manifested by the spiritual cognitive principle representing the energy of the soul. It seems that the flash of lightning, skirting the fringe of a massive assemblage of fresh, rain-bearing clouds reflects the beauty of the girdle round the waist of Sri Krishna. The kaustubha and other precious gems and ornaments appertaining to the soul disseminate the beauty of the person of Sri Krishna. The spiritual agency by whose means the ravishing call that has power to draw the soul manifests itself is observed in the figure of a flute. The flutes and other instruments of this world that serve to carry the musical notes of every variety may be the reflection of the divine flute. The inconceivable figure of Sri Krishna is observed to be placed under the Kadamba tree, embodying spiritual horripilation, on the grassy woodland sloping to the water's edge of the Yamuna of the liquid spiritual essence. It is by means of these spiritual symbols that the beloved son of Nanda, Sri Krishna, Lord of the spiritual realm, makes his appearance to the view of the Vaishnavas in their exclusive state, samadhi. But persons who are unfortunately blinded by empiric knowledge are unable to find the form and distinctive concrete aspects of the spiritual existence even when the realm of the Absolute is actually brought before their eyes in the exclusive state. Sri Krishnachandra, in this manner, is realized, in the exclusive state, as maddening the realm of pure souls by the strains of his flute and attracting the minds of the milkmaids, gopis. How may those who are infatuated by the vanities of high lineage, etc., attain to Krishna? Persons who are free from all worldly vanities are alone eligible for being attracted by Krishna. Those who understand the nature of spiritual existence know that sadhus fall into two clearly defined groups, viz. 1. Those who have attained to the state of the gopis, and 2. Those who follow in the footsteps of such self-realized souls. The former are called siddhas and the latter sadhakas. The graduated process of spiritual endeavor of those persons who have realized the state of gopis is as follows. In the course of their sojourn in this world, the music of Krishna's flute enters the ear of a few exceptionally fortunate persons. The sweetness of the music exercising its attraction on such persons makes them fit for the highest spiritual status. This quickly dissipates their male disposition, which prompts people of this world to seek for their own sensuous enjoyment. On the complete disappearance of the male disposition, there is aroused another temperament characterized by a spontaneous preference for following the guidance of those who are possessed of the mellow quality of spiritual consorthood. In this position, the femininity of the soul in the form of capacity for ministering to the enjoyment of Godhead manifests itself. The expectation of consorthood becomes so strong that the soul under its influence develops all the external symptoms of the state of madness. The first experience arises in the form of hearing about the specific figure, Rupa, of Krishna. This process falls into two parts. The first of these is of the nature of spontaneous realization of Krishna's attraction in the sphere of one's ordinary cognitive activity. This event is called the hearing of the music of Krishna's flute. This is followed by the hankering for listening to the narrative regarding Krishna from those who have had an actual sight. This form of listening to the scriptural narratives of Krishna from the lips of sadhus also comes under this head. The realization of Krishna that is attainable by such hearing and study forms the division of spiritual endeavor which is called listening to the quality of Krishna. The next is seeing the delineation of Krishna as in a picture. This is effected by the realization of the purpose and supreme skill of Krishna in the design of this material world. He who has been enabled to realize that the material world is the distorted, perverted reflection of the realm of the Absolute is said to have had a sight of Krishna as in a picture. In other words, the preliminary stages of the state of devotion to Vishnu, or Vaishnavada, accrues in the three different ways of spontaneous realization of its desirability, realization of the nature of divine worship by the study of the scriptures, and actual personal experience of the nature of Godhead from a consideration of the wonderful organization of the material universe. Unadulterated faith in Krishna as the source of the loving devotion of Brahma is the preliminary stage in the gradual appearance of the process of spiritual love. The appearance of this form of unalloyed faith is followed by attainment of close association with the sadhus, who are denizens of spiritual Brahma. Such association is the cause of the attainment of Krishna. Those persons who have the rare fortune of gaining the companionship of sadhus in course of their further progress on the path of spiritual endeavor, which is comparable to the stealthy approach of the sweetheart to the secret place of meeting with her lover, may perchance realize, at some rare moment, their auspicious meeting with the supreme object of their love on the water's edge of the Yamuna, the stream of the liquid essence of the pure soul. By meeting with Krishna, the transcendental bliss of divine communion, Parananda, ensues, which at once causes all worldly felicity previously experienced to appear as infinitesimally trivial in comparison. The supreme bliss grows apace in the heart as the days pass towards the most dearly loved ever new form of the soul of all souls. The root of spiritual love is that attachment of the individual soul who is constituted of the principles of pure cognition and bliss towards the concentrated divine form of all existence, all cognition and all bliss, which is perfect in itself and natural for the soul. This attachment, rati, under the favoring impulse of the principle of mellowness, rasa, undergoes development by taking on the form of rasa. Rasa is of 12 kinds. The 5 rasas of Santa, equanimity, dasya, service, sakya, friendship, vatsalya, parental affection, and madhura, consorthood, are the 5 primary varieties. These 5 are of the nature of substantive relationship. Vira, heroic, kruna, tender, raudra, keen, hasya, laughter, yanaka, terrible, bibhatsa, abnormal, and adbhuta, wonderful, are the 7 secondary rasas. These arise spontaneously from the establishment of relationship. Prior to the establishment of actual relationship, there is no possibility of external manifestation of attachment. These specific visible manifestations are all secondary rasas. Even after attachment, rati, has assumed the form of rasa, liquid mellowness, it does not attain to its full resplendence except in combination with the 4 samagras, ingredients, viz. A. Bibhava, particular state, b. Anubhava, perception, c. Sattvika, natural indication of emotion, and d. Vyabhakari, transitory feeling. A. Bibhava is of 2 kinds, viz. 1. Alambana, cause, and 2. Udipana, aggravating agent. Alambana is again of 2 kinds, viz. 1. Krishna, and 2. Devotee of Krishna. The good qualities and distinctive natures of Krishna and his devotees constitute the division of Udipana, i.e., exceedant of attachment or rati. B. Anubhava is of 3 kinds, viz. 1. Alankara, 2. Udbasvara, and 3. Vachika. Alankara, such as hava, bhava, etc., in all 20 in number, has been classified into the 3 divisions of 1. Anga, of the body, 2. Ayatnoya, spontaneous, and 3. Swabhava, of the individual nature of a person. Sighing, dancing, rolling on the ground and such other activities are called Udbasvara. Alapa, Bilapa, etc., are the 12 Vachika Anubhavas. Stupefaction, sweating, etc., are the 8 Sattvika Bikaras. Nirvada, etc., are the 33 Vyabhakari bhavas. The rasa and all its ingredients, samagri, have a constant bearing on the development of rati till it reaches the stage of mahabhava. The attachment, rati, for krisalma is stabhava, the permanent state, or the rasa, mellow liquid principle, of bhakti, devotion. In conditioned souls the principle manifests itself as bhakti or service. In the free state it appears as the principle of love in the realm of the absolute, Vaikuntha. Attachment for Krishna develops up to the stage of Mahabhava. The process of development by the methods of identification with primary and secondary rasas and by the help of ingredients enriching the variety of its manifestations constitutes the eternal treasure of the soul in her state of perfect spiritual freedom. It is this which is also the object of endeavor of the conditioned souls. If it be urged that there is no necessity for any attempt to attain that which is eternally inherent in the soul, the answer is that the resuscitation of the eternal principle in the conditioned state is the process of the spiritual endeavors of the conditioned neophyte. It has been realized in their natural exclusive state by great souls such as Sri Vyasadeva, etc., and also by our gurus that attachment, rati, for Krishna is the most wholesome principle of the realized essence of the jiva soul. The nature of the substantive reality is in a slight measure manifested in its reflected image. It is for this reason that the principle of attraction between male and female in this world has proved to be the most charming of all mundane entities. But the attachment between male and female of this world is utterly insignificant and condemnable in comparison with the principle of the transcendental reality. This is indicated by the passage in the narrative of the circular dance in the Bhagavatam. He who listens to or recites to others with due reverence and faith these pastimes of Vishnu with the damsels of Brahma attains to the state of transcendental devotion for Godhead, resulting in the simultaneous and speedy disappearance from his heart of the malady of mundane lust. It is as if the mirage of the desert is replaced by the shining water of the magnificent lake, offering the sorely needed cooling drink to the thirsty traveler led astray by the deceptive image of the life-giving liquid. I have described the limit of the love and activity of the eternally self-realized souls towards the eternally realized personality of Sri Krishna. The limit of attachment is Mahabhava. The limit of activity is Maharasa. This is also the limit of vocabulary sprung from the material principle. That which lies beyond should be seen by means of the exclusive state, samadhi. It is the only thing needful to be imbued with serving love for Sri Krishna, of the perfectly pure kind. It is the nature of genuine serving spiritual love to be absolutely free from all worldly dross. A person, in whom this pure impulse manifests itself, is thereby rendered perfectly pure in every detail of his conduct. Such a person is naturally disinclined to ungodly conduct, all his affinities having undergone a complete change of objective from the mundane to the absolute. But it is necessary to bear in mind that before concluding any conduct to be blamable, the status of the person displaying such conduct should be considered. This is the most material point. No conduct is universally good or bad. If the attempt be made to arrive at a uniform body of rules of conduct which are to be binding on all, such a procedure is sure to end in futile speculations and to frustrate all real endeavor for ethical improvement. This is the great disservice that has been done to man by speculative ethics. It has only served to blunt the edge of natural goodness of judgment by entangling it in the meshes of specious theories that are bound to be wholly wide of the mark. It is, therefore, the first and foremost duty of every individual who is sincerely anxious of not being deceived by the shadow, to avoid all barren speculative discussions on principle. There is also another pitfall which is avoided by a person who is really inspired by love for the substantive truth and the desire for serving him for the sake of promoting his pleasure. Such a person never engages in sectarian hair-splitting. He is found to maintain a discreet attitude towards sectarian disputes and in respect of external symbols which differ in different communities. These issues, as a matter of fact, derive all their value from the purpose which they are instituted to serve. Their external face need, therefore, be neither undervalued nor overestimated. The conduct of the devotee who is actuated by natural love for the service of the Absolute in these matters should not, therefore, be misunderstood. Such a person is neither opposed to, nor is he a supporter of these external features as such. Those who are servants of Hari know very well that no work is worth doing which does not please Hari. Neither is knowledge, by which attachment to Hari is not engendered, of any value. Persons who are possessed of this truly rational insight always engage themselves in activities that are promotive of spiritual progress and desist from every form of activity which has anything else than Hari as its objective. This consideration regulates the minutest detail of the activities of the servants of Hari. They are not deflected from this course by the breadth of an hair in life or in death. So constant is the loyalty of their judgment and so utterly incapable of being overclouded by any extraneous consideration. They are always possessed of unerring judgment, are full of the natural humility of the pure soul and are constantly engaged in doing good to all entities that exist. They know truly that the soul is the only pure essence, that mind is a product of the principle of inertia, and that the gross physical body is a thing of the earth. They are also well aware that the jiva, the individual soul, is the eternal servant of Godhead whose spiritual function is of the nature of spontaneous liking for the service of Krishna, that he is endowed with the aptitude for his natural function of loving service even while he may be resident in this material world. Possessing the true knowledge of all this, persons, who are endowed with the spiritual disposition that is found on the plane of Brahma, realizing in their souls absolute freedom from all stultifying influences of this phenomenal world, are constantly engaged in the service of Krishna, the concentrated personal embodiment of all existence, all cognition and all bliss. This worship is performed spontaneously in the exclusive state proper by the soul disengaged from all mundane affinities. It is when the impulse of love cannot be compassed by the pure spiritual essence of the soul on account of its triumphant growth that it overflows its natural bounds into the subtle mental body in which it manifests itself in a mixed form. This gives rise to the mental worship consisting of the processes of manana, resolution of service, smarana, recollection, dhyana, meditation, dharana, retention, assimilation, the thought of Buddhacity, purification of the material cases, etc. This mental worship need not be avoided on the ground that it is of a mixed nature. This is inevitable till the dissolution of the material cases themselves. But the process that extends to the mind and body from the soul should be distinguished from the apparently similar process reached by mundane sensuous speculation by its ascending effort. This latter is idolatry proper and is categorically different from the mixed spiritual process. These mental activities, derived from the soul, on undergoing still further expansion, overflow into the gross physical body. Coming down to the tip of the tongue, it expresses itself as utterance of the chant of the name, quality, etc. of Godhead. Attaining the proximity of the ear, it brings about the hearing of the same. To the eye, it imparts the impulse of the vision of the beauty and figure of Godhead. The pure spiritual moods of the soul overflow into the bodily expressions of horripilation, shedding of tears, shivering, dancing, prostrations by way of obeisance, rolling on the bare ground, acts of loving embrace, journey to the holy tirthas connected with the doings of Godhead, etc. This overflowing of the spiritual principle into material activity is inconceivable in its nature and is the manifestation of the causeless mercy of the divinity intended to bring about the turning of the direction of mundane activity Godward. The institution of honoring of Mahaprasadam has been ordained by the scriptures to bring about the change of the activity of indulging in the pleasures of the table in the direction of the service of Godhead. This argument holds also in the case of other spiritual injunctions. This is the true significance of every ritual. It is not to be supposed that persons who have realized the true nature of the spiritual function neglect the due performance of worldly activities that are inspired by the mundane purpose. What the perfectly enlightened soul does is this. She maintains internally the attitude of unconditional feminine submissiveness towards Sri Krishna while displaying the face of a heroic masculinity in her external conduct towards persons and duties of this world. Externally, the pure devotee is found to be the most heroic among ambitious workers, a male prepared to exercise all the prerogatives of his superior sex among females, profoundly experienced in dealing with society, a good teacher of boys, the greatest of those who possess the knowledge of our material needs, but is withal skilled in turning them to the account of the summum bonum, the peacemaker in war and the purifier of the hearts of sinners. All this is found to coexist with an opposite disposition, which is the outcome of excessive increase of the impulse of spiritual love, which leads the devotee to be averse to seeking popularity and to prefer the intimate service of his beloved in the seclusion of retirement from this world. The points that are emphatically brought out by the considerations penned above are that it is not possible to serve Sri Krishna except under the direction, or, what is strictly identical with the same, by association in the service of pure devotees who alone are in a position to distinguish the chaff from the grain. As soon as the least point of real contact with the pure devotees is established by the causeless grace of the latter, the fortunate recipient of such priceless favor is thereby endowed with the faculty that can distinguish the essential from the non-essential. The pure devotee is always accustomed to overlook all external defect and accept only the inner significance of every occurrence. This, of course, does not mean that one should continue to commit offenses in the expectation of such indulgence. The deliberate offender cannot obtain the real mercy of the pure devotee by reason of such offense. It is obligatory to follow the conduct of the perfectly blameless servants of Sri Krishna if one is to realize the nature of their unbounded mercy. If the hand of the observer is placed over his eye, it is bound to prevent his receiving the light of the glorious luminary, who is never chary of pouring out, unasked and in unstinted profusion and without the least reservation, his light and warmth towards everything. Critics who are so unfortunate as to be disposed to stop their earholes against the expostulations of self-realized souls and persist in looking at the transcendental, perfectly purifying pastimes of Sri Krishna through the spectacles of their own malicious sensuous dispositions, are no wiser than the person who does not spare to criticize the sun and to blame that luminary for withholding his light from one who is determined to keep his hand tightly placed over his eyes. It is necessary to learn how to behave towards the truth if one is to make his acquaintance at all. Malicious misrepresentations and willful misunderstandings cannot enable so-called critics to be enlightened about the nature of the truth nor to enlighten others regarding him. I desire no other boon than that of being sincerely disposed to make my complete submission to the pure devotees of Sri Krishna for the sole reward of their approval. I am confident of attaining to the sight of the truth by following the method which precludes all other desires than that of the causeless and exclusive service of all the servants of the Absolute Truth. May the pure devotees pardon the innumerable lapses of my aspiring attempt to follow in their holy footsteps in all humility. If comparative study of religion, empiric history is a narrative of events occurring in time and is, therefore, necessarily limited by ascertained chronology. The ascertainment of the chronological order of events has suggested and supplied the materials for a science of growth or evolution deduced from the chronological sequence of actual occurrences. Attempts have been made to apply the method of chronological evolutionary treatment, in the face of oblivious difficulties, to the subject of religion by a growing number of learned scholars, resulting in an apparently surprising degree of unanimity as regards the conclusions reached. It is necessary at the outset of theistic history to attempt evaluation of the speculations with reference to the worship of Sri Radhakrishna to bring them into line with the absolute truth. The wide gap that separates the worship of Sri Radhakrishna from the conclusions of empiric religion requires to be explained in a systematic manner in the light of transcendental history, which is not limited by any limited chronology to a limited world. Sri Radhakrishna is the eternally coupled divine pair, Sri Radha being the predominated, and Sri Krishna the predominating aspect, indissolubly joined together, of the complete, active, absolute personality. Radhakrishna or the Absolute is thus a composite of two persons of whom one predominates over the other. Neither of them is a person of any exclusive or limited sense. The personality of the divinity in either aspect is absolute and, therefore, also, all-inclusive. The impersonal view gives a partial and, therefore, misleading aspect of the Absolute. Hastiness of judgment due to inherent defect of understanding is responsible for mistaking the impersonal view as being superior to that of divine personality. The personality of the Absolute should not also, on the other hand, be gratuitously confounded with the personality of our defective empiric speculations, in which the truth is obscured by the predominance of limiting, elusive, material reservations. Radha is not the female of our perceptual or conceptual experience derived from the observations of the phenomenal world by means of defective senses. The Absolute can be neither male nor female of our experience for the simple reason that such male or female can be but one of a number of mutually exclusive entities and cannot, therefore, accommodate the rest of them. It is the intention to avoid this difficulty arising from the defective nature of our sense experience that has led the empiric philosophers to hit upon the barren and logically untenable notion of impersonality to indicate the nature of the Absolute. This has only landed them in far worse difficulties. The whole issue hinges on a right understanding of the nature of the Absolute. If God were really a zero, we could be saved the trouble of attempting to describe his nature. If God is not zero, he should logically be both everything and no particular thing, at one and the same time. Everything is in Radha, Krishna. But Radha Krishna is not identical with anything except themselves. In other words, Radha Krishna has a specific individual existence of their own, simultaneously with their external all-pervasive existence. The external entities in their individual aspect are not constituent parts of Radha Krishna, as the Absolute cannot be made up of a number of particulars nor even of the aggregates of individual entities. As a matter of fact, individual entities as well as their aggregations are manifestations of Sri Krishna in and by the plenary divine power Sri Radhika. The manifestations are neither outside nor identical with their source. The question how Sri Radhika can accommodate the material universe or other persons partially similar to herself occurs naturally enough to the speculative mind whose activities are confined within the limits of 3 dimensions, but it would be sheer dogmatism and perfectly illogical to try to squeeze the absolute within the narrow mental scope for the reason that the mind is incapable of conceiving existences of more than 3 dimensions or of less than 1. There cannot be such a thing as a comparative estimate of different creeds without postulation of a standard of value. It is, of course, possible to find out the values of the different creeds in terms of one of them. Let us suppose that this is done with every one of the creeds by turn with conscientious impartiality and sound judgment. Will it take us nearer the absolute? Certainly not. The absolute could be approached only by means of the absolute. If none of these creeds be of the nature of the absolute, the permutation and combination of any number of relative entities can never yield any knowledge of the absolute. The method that should be applied is that of assigning local values to the fractional parts by relating them to the integer. Those who adopt the moral principle as the standard by which to judge the local value of a creed seek to arrange the creeds in an order of moral superiority. As an instance, we may take the methods of Dr. R.G. Bhandarkar, Barth and their followers. They try to evaluate the worship of Sri Radhakrishna by the moral standard. They consider the worship of Rama and Sita as superior, being more moral than the worship of Sri Radhakrishna. Such estimations assume the absolute validity of the ill-defined moral standard of empiric thinkers. Those extremely well-informed writers could not have been wholly unaware of this radical philosophical weakness of their standard of value in arriving at any really dependable conclusion in regard to the relative worth of the different creeds. Idolatry is the proper logical denial of the worship of the absolute. Idolatry is the result of despair to find out the real truth. When the empiricist finds it impossible to discover the absolute by means of his abortive speculations, but is anxious to provide a working hypothesis for good conduct, he dresses up his known erroneous idea to do duty as the spurious substitute of the inconceivable absolute. The moral principle cannot be clearly defined by those very persons who do not scruple to proclaim it as the only safe test for the valuation of religions. Such a method amounts really to nothing higher than a perverse advocacy of a particular whim. The conclusions thus reached are also never claimed to be unchainable or absolute. The tentative and inconclusive nature of the performance is held to be part and parcel of the law emanating from the conscious will of a person possessing the supreme power and governing the cosmic evolution. This establishes the validity of the principle by shifting the responsibility by way of self-contradiction to the shoulders of the absolute himself. The irrational acquiescence of despairing individuals provides its other sanction. As a matter of fact, the method which is the fabrication of a particular fallible human mind is confidently offered for the convinced tentative acceptance of all human minds on grounds indicated above. Morality is nothing but an empiric fiction leading to no definite goal. It makes its votary move perpetually in a vicious circle, impelled by the desire to discover rational support for the conduct of the average man after performance on grounds of expediency. Expediency is not, however, the acceptance of but the refusal to accept any definable principle of general conduct. But the aspirations of the physical body and mind refuse to be satisfied even by being allowed a free scope which cannot be realized in practice. The moral philosopher ignores this ugly circumstance and makes a show of sticking heroically to the worship of his idol, which cannot save him from constant and irremediable transgressions against itself. If this is not appreciated by the victim, he is charged with the unpardonable crime of pessimism on the ground that it is our moral duty to try to make the best of a bad job. But are we sure that the job is really bad and that it has not been made so by our bungling and hypocritical method of approaching it? The worship of Sri Radhakrishna is condemned by certain empiric moralists because it seems to them to idolize promiscuous sexuality. But is promiscuous sexuality really undesirable? Is it undesirable for the reason that it is likely to prevent the realization of the maximum sensual and other pleasures derivable from regulated sexual act? Who is to be the judge? If the attainment of the maximum pleasure by the individual be the desirable object, has promiscuity been really proved to be incompatible with such object? The ethical repugnance to promiscuity after all amounts to nothing more serious than this, that it is not in conformity with the status quo, and not that it may not be made the status quo with proper and reasonable safeguards. The empiric moral idea is no higher than the above. lest my monopoly of enjoyment of a particular male or female, whom I choose to like for the time being, be jeopardized, I become an advocate of monogamy, with or without divorce, and worshipper of Rama Sita. If sexuality is bad, how can even monogamy be good? If promiscuity is bad in itself, how can monogamy be good in itself? By what test is goodness or badness itself to be determined? It has never been possible for aspirations of the flesh endowed with a pseudo-conscious form by the mild to satisfy the genuine demands of our reason. All speculations of the mind are inconclusive and erroneous. The moral notion is, indeed, only one of those inexplicable entities that demand to be explained. Those who erroneously think that the worship of Sri Sri Radha Krishna is immoral forget that no mental speculation has any access to the Absolute, who is the object of worship in this case. What consolation does a mentalist expect by worshipping Rama Sita? Is he, thereby, likely to be encouraged in cultivating his monogamous nuptial relations with assiduity? Can such a conclusion be regarded as logically tenable? If God happens to be monogamous, am I likely to become so, by contemplating his conduct? Can also the very notion of monogamy or marriage apply to the Absolute? We may not want to be promiscuous for absence of unlimited sexual and other powers. It is only a counsel of possible discomfort. Why should we suppose that God's power is limited by any adverse condition? The attempt to judge the Absolute by a limiting standard set up by ourselves for our regulation is opposed to the notion of the Absolute. The Absolute is located beyond the scope of our mental activity. The phenomenal world exposed to the view of our senses is only an abrupt and unintelligible section of the whole truth. We stand powerless in the presence of the infinity of smallness and the infinity of greatness that spread at either end beyond this limited span of the visible world and refuse to show themselves to us. This is the tantalizing condition of the existence of three dimensions into which we find ourselves securely imprisoned. If any merciful being tries to communicate the tidings of the Absolute to us, he is bound to fail completely unless he is also capable of imparting to us the necessary receptive faculty. This is the position of the agnostics to a certain extent, as they are conscious of their limitations and are accordingly unprepared to commit themselves to any opinions, favorable or unfavorable, regarding the Absolute. It is a more consistent attitude than the self-sufficiency of Barth or Bhandarkar. The skeptics disbelieve the possibility of the Absolute taking the initiative and communicating himself to us in a way that is beyond the comprehension of our present limited faculties. The skeptics, therefore, want to sit still in sheer despair. The atheists, indeed, speak only the language of delirium when they positively deny the existence of the Absolute. They do not deny the fact of relative existence or relative knowledge. How can they, therefore, consistently refuse to admit the logical necessity of absolute existence and absolute knowledge? Error can have, rationally speaking, no absolute existence, and even its seeming existence can only be a reflection of an absolute existence erroneously apprehended by our defective cognitive faculty. Atheism represents at its very best only the crude cogitations of the undeveloped intellect regarding the inconceivable. As a matter of fact, the worship of Sri Sri Radha Krishna or of Rama Sita, if they are regarded as historical entities located on the mundane plane, is rightly liable to the charge of anthropomorphism. By the mere assertion that a form of such anthropomorphic worship is moral, its absolute nature is only still further ignored. Those who choose unnecessarily to get engrossed in the manipulation of relative speculation regarding the Absolute and declare it as the only method of approach to the Absolute, owe a cautious hearing to anyone who does not muddle the real nature of the issue. Almost the first thing that requires to be settled clearly and at the outset of any so-called historical inquiry regarding religion is whether the object of our quest is, indeed, the Absolute. Those who are not prepared to admit that religion should be identical with the quest of the Absolute have an undoubted right of criticizing the conclusions of those who accept the religion of the Absolute. This is what the empiric thinkers have been indefatigable in doing all along. But is it irrelevant to opine that empiric criticism is bound to be altogether wide of the mark in such a case for the reason that the attempt to judge of the Absolute, or of what is even claimed as the Absolute, is, by the fact of this very reservation, removed wholly outside its self-admitted jurisdiction? The absolutists rest their case on the fact that the Absolute can and does communicate himself by imparting to us the capacity of receiving him. They go further and assert that we are already eternally endowed by the Absolute with such faculty, but are free to willfully neglect to make the proper use of the same. that the Absolute is, nevertheless, trying continuously to persuade us to be willing to know him by making the proper use of those faculties. These are the fundamentals of every religion. The Absolute is always speaking to us regarding himself, and we are always deliberately shutting our ears to his voice. The Absolute has been eternally appearing to us in the form of the spiritual scriptures as the testament of his utterances. He is also sending down his agents in the human form to speak to us with the human voice to make the same perceptible even to our sealed ears. All this is super-rational. The agents of the Absolute appear among us in order to make the meaning of the spiritual scriptures perceptible to our dormant understanding. The scriptures require to be interpreted to us by those who know. Those who are not prepared on principle to listen to the voice of the Absolute need not decide that it is not the voice of the Absolute before giving it their impartial and full hearing. Of course, there is every risk of wasting our time on scoundrels personating as agents of the Absolute by dint of their sheer impudence. It should not, however, take much time or trouble for an honest inquirer to find these out. It is always possible to find the right teacher of the Absolute, provided one really wants to find him. The agent of the Absolute must also be eternally existent in the available form to all who want to find him at all. Very few of us really want to find the teacher of the Absolute, even if we know that it is easy to find him. Most of us have no interest for the Absolute. This is partly due to our traditional wrong conception regarding the nature of the Absolute. It is our purpose in this chapter to try to invite the attention of the reader to certain widely prevalent misconceptions regarding the nature of the Absolute, by an examination of the extent of their deviation from the Absolute standard. The creeds that prevail in the world are divided naturally into two exclusive groups according as they happen to follow the method of empiric search of the Absolute or that of revelation. The empiric creeds may be broadly grouped into four divisions, viz. 1. Theism, 2. Agnosticism and skepticism, 3. Pantheism, and 4. Undifferentiated monism. The revealed religions show the following order of evolution, viz. 1. Worship of Godhead realized as a male person, Vasudeva. 2. As couple, Lakshmi Narayana, Ramasita. 3. As served by many married consorts, Dwaraksha Krsna. And 4. As served spontaneously by many consorts who follow no conventional matrimonial regulation in the coupled form of Sri Sri Radha Krishna. The instinct of the service of the Absolute is innate in human nature. It is, however, ordinarily overlaid with the negative dominating impulse of self-gratification. According as the one or the other impulse proves stronger, a man makes his choice as between the two broad divisions of religion. A person who has full confidence in his own powers in attaining the truth follows the empiric method. One who is convinced of the utter inadequacy of the human intellect to find the truth is inclined to follow the method of revelation. The empiricist worships the mixed product resulting from his actual sensuous experience. The word experience, as used in connection with empiricism, should be understood as referring exclusively to knowledge of the external world derived through the process of sense perception. Sense perception is the material or limiting condition of all mental process. The mind is the meeting ground of the principle of animation with the inanimate material principle supplied by the senses. Mental activities. The reaction of the animate principle on the inanimate. It is a composite of two apparent incompatibles. No mental activity is possible unless both principles are present. The principle of animation is mixed up with or overlaid by that of inanimation in the mental function. It follows that empiric worship is bound to be either acceptance or rejection of the material principle in one or more of its aspects. In this case, the mind is the accepting or rejecting agent. The mind cannot function except by way of acceptance or rejection of materials supplied by the senses. But the mind cannot cease to function. It must either accept or reject and must also continue to do so alternately. It cannot accept or reject for good. That would tantamount to its own destruction. Atheism represents the temporary rejecting function of alternatives by the mind. The mind refuses to accept as true or desirable, because the two are really identical in this case, any stationary condition, for the reason that it is afraid that it would be suicidal. Atheism wants to live on the state of ever-changing activity. It is the proper negation of the Absolute conceived as inaction. It is justified in disbelieving the Absolute by the evidence of its actual sense experience. But it should by parity of reason be equally prepared to extend the bounds of its experience by any and every method. This, however, it is not always prepared to do. For instance, it refuses to accept the method of submission to the truth for his realization as enjoined by the revealed scriptures. Atheism is thus proved to be an exclusive partisan of the method of empiric self-sufficiency in spite of its profession of freedom from all bias to creed and dogma. Its sterility is due to this hypocritical reservation. Its exclusive attachment to self-gratification is the cause of its disinclination to seek for the truth and its consequent failure to find him. Agnosticism and skepticism deny the existence of possibility of the knowledge of the absolute. Both do so on the strength of their limited experience and without due consideration of the method proposed by the scriptures. Both have an attitude of disbelief towards the method of revelation by their overconfidence in their own conclusions. This is really self-contradictory, as neither professes to be able to know the truth. The skeptic is the greater sinner of the two, because he is not even prepared to admit the very existence of the absolute. Both really depend on the method of narrow dogmatism in their own cases, although appearing to condemn the attitude in the case of others. The explanation of this irrational attitude is to be sought, as in the case of atheists, in undue attachment to the prospects of this transitory world, which is father to the thought that it would be heroic not to seek to fly from the state of ignorance and misery which is supposed by them to be unavoidable. The argument that is used by the theists is that ignorance and misery is due to the self-elected folly of the votaries of worldly vanities, whose position is psychologically unsound and is also opposed to the moral principle. It is the nihilistic attitude that becomes the worst of nuisances if it be allowed to pass itself off as a constructive ideal. The pantheistic attitude is the most treacherous of all, as it wears the mask of theism, although in principle it is identical with atheism. The pantheists profess to see God in phenomenal nature. This is the concrete denial of the absolute. The theists do not counsel the worship of the limited and transitory. The pantheists affect to find no difference between this world and the spiritual realm. The pantheistic school appears in a variety of forms in this world, the most common group being that which bears the name of Smartus in India. The Smartus hold that the object of all worship enjoined by the scriptures is the improvement of our worldly felicity, present and prospective. The view finds its psychological support in the current literatures of the world, which are busy in vindicating the ways of the world. What the atheist is really afraid of is that he might be called upon to modify his worldly activities out of deference to any transcendental consideration which in his opinion cannot possess any present worldly value and may merely and falsely deprive him of a present felicity. This is met by the pantheist with the assurance that the transcendental would be of no use if it did not serve the plans of the worldling better than otherwise. The pantheist, however, cannot really adduce sufficient rational grounds for his contention except the testimony of experience of following the performance in blind faith of the ceremonials laid down in the Shastras. The pantheists are, therefore, more grossly worldly minded than even the professed atheists. They are often confounded with the genuine theists, with whom they have nothing in common except their externals to a certain extent. The pantheists themselves, however, oppose the bona fide theists tooth and nail in the matter of the proper interpretation of the scriptures. It may be well to mention in this connection that the scriptures do contain a large body of injunctions, the performers of which are promised the reward of increased worldly felicity. There are also textbooks that are specially devoted to the vindication and glorification of the worldly point of view. The reason of this, according to theistic interpreters, is that the scriptures want to produce faith in the transcendental even in those who value nothing but worldliness. These worldlings are, therefore, promised what they want wrongly, on condition that they should submit to certain regulations. These regulations have been so framed as to serve the purpose of moderating their passion for present worldly enjoyment by promoting the attitude of reflection towards the past and future. Karma or worldly activity is the starting point of all pantheistic thought. It has been analyzed in all its bearings in special treatises of the scriptures. Those treatises do not purposely go beyond the limit of the phenomenal world in those discourses, which are intended exclusively for the edification of those who are incapable of believing in anything higher than worldly activity. But any impartial examination of the subject is bound to lead to a clearer apprehension of the defect as well as the merits of the view that worldly activity can supply all our needs. It is not my intention to suggest that whatever is contained in the section of the scriptures dealing with rituals is necessarily true even from the worldly point of view. The smartest, indeed, hold that the rituals, if properly performed, are really efficacious. This may or may not be so. The The Shastras contain numerous statements to the effect that the promise of worldly reward is meant to induce persons with a childish judgment to be moderate in the matter of their sensuous enjoyment. This may mean that the spiritual object is alone true while every other prospect is fleeting and illusory. But the fleeting and illusory result itself is valued by worldlings above every other thing. Whether the proper performance of the rituals also actually yields the worldly results promised by the scriptures is not relevant for our present purpose, and the matter may, therefore, be left open for those who want to speculate about it. This last is what the smartest and their school have been indefatigable in doing all over the world. These empiricists have also produced a science of theology which is wide of the mark for the spiritual purpose, although it may be more intelligible to and at the same time be fully exposed to the attacks of other sections of empiric thinkers. The pantheists are worshippers of mundane objects possessing definite material form and quantity. For this reason they are condemned as idolaters by those who prefer more refined and intellectual forms of worship. It is, however, philosophically impossible to draw any line between one form of empiric worship and another. All empiric schools ultimately depend on one's individual judgment for the ascertainment of truth. It has been shown above that the stuff of all such judgment is sense perception, which is thus the common object of worship in a gross or refined form of all empiric worshippers. The pantheists are led by their particular predilection to appreciate the objects and relationships of this phenomenal world for their own sake in the light of their empiric judgment. They are not prepared to admit the possibility of the uselessness of such a quest not directed to a higher purpose. In other words, they confound matter with the soul on principle. This is inevitable inasmuch as and so long as they are not repelled from their conclusions by the actual experience of the essential triviality of all worldly pursuits for their own sake. This is a disposition which only experience can teach. The pantheists are those who are in the heyday of their career of worldliness with an increasing belief in its worth and prospects. The scriptures led these people gently by the hand by seeming to agree with their conclusions and trying to modify their cause by pleading the advantages of moderation even in the case of worldly activity for its own sake. This is naturally and honestly construed by those who are genuine believers in pantheism as a confirmation of their view by the scriptures. But once the value of spiritual support begins to be really cherished, even those sections of the scriptures that are apparently devoted to the elucidation of the pantheistic position offer sufficient material for our serious consideration, leading to increasing modification of the pantheistic viewpoint based thereon. The raw teachers of pantheism do incalculable harm by their narrow sectarian advocacy of the principle of worldly felicity on the authority of the scriptures. The unspiritual pantheistic view falls pat with the theory of Darwinian evolution and has accordingly captured the hearts of those modern scholars who are still under the spell of that theory. They are not, of course, prepared to admit their partiality for materialism, thanks to the way of escape that has been cleverly provided for them by the subtleties of the idealists who require careful attention from all students of the absolute. The pantheism of Sri Sankaracharya is the typical case. He is the intellectual protagonist of the pantheistic view, basing his conclusions on apparently rational interpretation of the scriptures. The view, which has really been in existence from a period long anterior to the time of Sankara, in its present current form professes to follow mainly the exposition of Sankara. But Sankara himself is not capable of being properly understood by a materialist. The big literature of commentaries that has been brought into being by the pseudo-followers of Sankara presents not Sankara's view but that of the commentators themselves. Sankara seems to justify the worship of nature in order to be able to get beyond nature to nature's God, who, he declares, is unintelligible to the limited reason except as the incomprehensible reality identical with the cognitive principle. This analysis contains an encouragement to idolaters, pantheists, with a view to wean them ultimately from the worship of any form of mental concoction. The real difficulty that is experienced in accepting fully the philosophy of Sri Sankaracharya is that it is not possible to agree with his proposal in favor of the worship of nature without discarding the purely spiritual point of view which the theory ultimately professes to seek to establish. By material means it is never possible to attain to the spiritual vision. Sankara does not also say so. He was forced to recognize the forms of pantheistic worship in order to get a hearing at all from idolaters. In this sense only his seeming advocacy of the cause of pantheism can be regarded as consistent with the spiritual standpoint. But Sankara has been exploited for a quite different purpose by the school of undifferentiated cognitive monism. They want to make the ultimate reality devoid of all activity. They also want to make it a unity that is unintelligible and inexpressible. To this conclusion they try to arrive by following mainly the dialectic method of Sankara and secondarily by idealistic interpretation of the scriptures. This is really empiricism pure and simple, the reference to the scriptures being merely to fortify the conclusions of mental speculation. The objections to mental speculation as the method of quest of the absolute, therefore, apply fully to this school. It is in fact in order to escape from this unanswerable charge that the believers in the undifferentiated Brahman are constrained to make their inconsistent appeal to the scriptures. Looked at from the point of view of material thought, the activity or existence of the spiritual principle is only capable of being negatively suspected by it. There can be no actual touch between material thought and the transcendental absolute. This is admitted by Sankara, who looks at the absolute from his plane. But the words of Sankara are not comprehensible to those who do not possess the transcendental altitude of his vision. The seemingly negative conclusion of Sankara is accepted without its all-important reservations by the egoistic disposition of empiric thinkers who can follow Sankara only to a certain distance in the negative way. This is not their fault. It is inevitable. The spiritual issue can never be approached by mental speculation. It is the purpose of Sri Sankaracharya to demonstrate this to all open-minded persons by argument that is also intelligible to mentalists. But those who do not possess the requisite openness of judgment necessarily misunderstand the purpose of the great Kriya. The above four groups with their variants into which the empiric creeds are divided have been eternally occupied in propagating views that are calculated to lead us away from the quest of the absolute. Unless one is prepared to cease to be guided by the accumulated load of misconceptions that have been sedulously impressed upon him by every empiric institution of this world, it is not possible to be able to be disposed to catch the real meaning of the genuine teacher of the absolute. That which I am going to relate next is, therefore, categorically different from the subject matter treated by the empiric creeds. The absolute is claimed to be the reality proper that is eternally located beyond the scope of all experience of the limited and transitory available through the physical senses. The very first question that has to be answered before actually beginning a narration of the absolute is whether it will be possible for ordinary people of this world to catch the true meaning of such a narrative. The answer is given by the scriptures. They say that the ordinary human being, provided he at all believes in the absolute and is prepared to give him his unconditional hearing, can by listening to the exposition of the activities of the absolute recorded in the scripture from the lips of self-realized souls attain to the knowledge of the absolute, by the grace of the latter. This method is different from that of empiric quest and leads to a definite and thoroughly dependable result. The personal factor which is capable of being done away with in empiric epistemology is the central and abiding feature of the method of the quest of the absolute enjoined by the scriptures. The guru is the pivot of the whole process. The scriptures regard the quest of the absolute as identical with the quest of the spiritual preceptor. As soon as the spiritual preceptor is found, the negative quest gives place to the positive knowledge. Therefore the question is resolved into the quest of the spiritual teacher. He is to be sought also by the spiritual method. There must be no empiric reservation in the quest, which must be an exclusive search for the absolute. This is the definition of Shraddha, faith. The necessity for it is not properly realized by everybody. Those who do not experience the necessity will not find the spiritual preceptor. Those who really feel it will also find him. Till the spiritual preceptor is found, it is idle to waste one's time on the study of the scriptures. It is not possible to understand the narrative of the absolute without the help of personal exposition by the preceptor. The preceptor and the disciple have to be brought into personal contact with one another if the latter is to benefit by the teaching. The personal relationship is that of absolute submission to the teacher on the part of the disciple. This must be so because the predominating absolute cannot be approached except by the method of absolute submission on the part of the predominated atomic particles. This absolute submission must not be fictitious. It must also be personal. The following narratives of the absolute are found in the scriptures. Their real meaning cannot be realized except by following the scriptural method stated above. This discourse should be regarded as helpful in arousing faith in the absolute by its rationalistic presentation of some of the grounds of such faith. It has a negative and symbolic value. It loosens the hold of empiric prejudices and thereby enables the truth to be mirrored in our hearts open to receive Him. After the soul has got tired of the death-like monotony of mental speculations regarding the truth and has also had sufficient experience of the delusive nature of both empiric knowledge and its promised prospects, he is inclined by a sense of sheer helplessness and misery to turn to the method of absolute submission to the spiritual preceptor and the scriptures for relief. This negative attitude is turned into one of positive and earnest inquiry by accidental association with sadhus. It is for the reason of finding the sadhu that a person who is utterly disgusted with worldly living and the method of mental speculation renounces the world and sets out on pilgrimage to holy places in search of self-realized souls who are supposed to reside at such places. It is rarely, indeed, that the true devotee of God reveals himself to the fortunate seeker. The sadhu is himself a transcendental being. To really know the sadhu is to be endowed with the spiritual vision. It is only by the grace of God that the transcendental nature of his devotee can be realized. It is only after the sadhu has been found that spiritual pupillage can really begin by the process of unconditional submission to his guidance. Then the disciple has to pass through the period of novitiate. If he does this with a guileless heart, he is rewarded with the sight of God himself and with his transcendental and eternal service. This last is the summum bonum. There is, however, gradation in the transcendental service of Godhead. It is not possible for the soul liable to conditioned existence to have the full knowledge of the Absolute. The jiva soul is delicately poised on the borderline that separates the limited from the spiritual. He has the potentiality of affinity for either. His affinity for the limited is due to freedom of initiative inherent in all animation conjoined to absence of perfect vision by reason of his tiny magnitude. Such affinity is, however, really opposed to his proper nature, which is essentially spiritual. The affinity of the soul for the spiritual can, therefore, be maintained only by the help of souls who are not liable to affinity for the limited. These eternally free souls are the inseparable associated counterparts of the Supreme Soul or Godhead himself. The sadhus have no mundane affinity. By the help of sadhus the conditioned soul is enabled to attain to the plane of the Absolute. But the novice has to pass through definite grades of progressive revelation. The full view of the divinity is the last to be attained. The service of divinity attains its perfection only on attainment of the complete vision. The first appearance of Godhead to the view of the spiritual novice is as Vasudeva, or the transcendental supreme single male person. This dissipates his empiric error that the truth is an abstract principle. The appearance of Vasudeva also frees the novice from the error that mistakes the personality of the Absolute as having any mundane quality or reference. Vasudeva is self-revealed in the unobstructive cognitive essence of the pure soul. He is the positive reality as distinguished from the abstraction of the mental speculationists, from the fleeting impressions of deluding entities limited by material space and broken up by the operation of passing time. Vasudeva is located above and beyond this unwholesome mundane plane. The realization of his transcendental personality is possible only to the spiritual cognitive principle, which is the essence of the soul, as distinguished from material or limiting principle. Vasudeva is the one person without a second. He is a person with a transcendental figure resembling the actual form of a male human being, but, inconceivably to us, free from all limited or unwholesome characteristics of the human form that is familiar to us. Vasudeva appears as the sole recipient of our service. He is realized as comprehending all existence, including that of his servitors. He is male but free from all mundane associations of sex. These opposite qualities are spontaneously reconciled in his transcendental personality. This is the first positive spiritual experience of the progressing novice. The worshipper of Vasudeva is, therefore, a truly spiritual devotee. He is categorically different from the atheist, agnostic, skeptic, elevationist or salvationist, who are all of them strictly confined to the mundane plane. The worship of Vasudeva is performed by the spiritual essence of the pure soul on the transcendental plane. Vasudeva can be worshipped only by the process that is absolutely free from all mundane reference. Therefore, the worship of Vasudeva is also a gift of Vasudeva himself. Vasudeva is identical in essence with his worship and with his worshipper. All of them belong to the same plane of the soul, which is located beyond the scope of our limited mental faculties. Vasudeva manifests himself to the pure essence of the jiva soul as soon as the latter is at all disposed to serve him in the proper way. It is rarely that a conditioned soul can attain to the spiritual service of Vasudeva. The conditioned soul is ordinarily prepared to be content with negative speculation. Very few persons of this world realize the necessity of search for the Supreme Personality who is revealed to us by all the scriptures. Everything concerning Vasudeva is purely spiritual. His name, servitors, paraphernalia, abode, form, activities are an inseparable part and parcel of himself. No amount of description can enable the reader to realize the nature of Vasudeva so long as one is not freed from the fetters of his limited faculties of apprehension. Vasudeva can be realized only by the grace of his devotee if we